Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know, I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution, the Alaskan Summit for Peace. Two world leaders meet. How did it go? Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, it seemed to went pretty good. Let's get right to the content. Two legends. Meet in Alaska. A lot of people was upset. He had his way. He got everything he wanted. He got one piece.
ロシアのプーチン大統領の姿と見られる機体が空に姿を見せました。ウクライナへの侵攻開始後初めての世界が注目する首脳会談が間もなく始まります。白、青、赤、
Hello, Mike.
今、プーチン大統領と見られる機体がアラスカ州に到着します。間もなく世界が注目する首脳会談が始まります。
Air Force One. You know, it came Air Force One. America was a big dog today on the world stage. Putin, Trump, not all the peons in Europe. You know they mean nothing. Benjamin Netanyahu, nobody today. Saudi King, who the hell are they? It was all about the two big men, Trump. That's why Europe is hating. They don't want the U.S. and Putin to see eye to eye straight things out. Stop off killing them and get this money. Get some of this Antarctic resource money there. A lot of money in the Arctic. Trillions on the line. A lot of people wanted Trump plane to go down and blame the Russia. Nuclear war. A lot of people's upset. Got to see the world leaders. Them is two of the world leaders. There's only one world leader not there. That's Xi Jinping. Those are maybe saying world leaders are talking about the European phonies. That's all a lie. All right. Let's see. Let's see them get off their plane. Now, a lot of people was upset, Europeans, that, and I didn't even notice it till they said it. Let's watch Trump and Putin walk down the steps. Now, Trump, he handled everything like a G, man. They wanted Trump to yell, scream, man. Trump ain't finna do that. Putin ain't for no disrespect. But notice how Trump, he gotta walk away before he get to the red carpet. You know. Now, whoever did that, I don't know. But the Western media is showing that as soon as Putin feet touched off his plane, this type of stuff matter. As soon as Putin's feet touched off the plane, red carpet was right there for him. They're pointing that out. Well, Putin didn't make them. That was hospitality. Somebody in Trump administration, that was a good look. But to have Trump so far back, they showing, it make Putin seem like a bigger boss. But it was noticed. they hating on Putin. He's taking it smooth. But like I knew they would, the Russian nuclear submarines did surround Alaska. 6 Russian warships. They had the place surrounded with nuclear weapons. I already knew they would. You know, they can't, just in case the Americans try something. I told you I wouldn't be no Alaska. But everything went smooth. But Trump and the U.S. did fly B-2 bombers and U.S. military planes over Putin and Trump. You know, that's kind of like them flexing on Putin, too. So they got away with a little something. He's walking towards him right now. And I'm gonna show you how these devils is. They even on channels examining who had the strongest handshake. I mean, these people is disgusting, bro. It was a handshake. It was not no see who gripped the strongest, who yanked who around. I mean, these people are pathetic. Yeah, so I think we're gonna start a bomb over. Yeah, Putin look over his shoulder. If you know that's disrespectful, really. But he know he had the place surrounded though. I already seen 6 warships, nuclear submarines surrounded it. It had Alaska right where they wanted it, just in case they tried anything. But the U.S. didn't play stupid, which we all need to be thankful. But this is winning right here. See Putin looking over his shoulder. Trump didn't move because he already knew. Trump gave himself up. Trump already knew this was gonna happen. Putin, like, hold on, man, what y'all doing? Trump, oh, don't worry about it. Ain't nothing. Putin, like, yeah, I see that. It is something. What that was B-2 bombers. It was and 4 fighter jets. Come on, bro. You don't do that one world leader. You never do that one world leader getting off the plane, all that hanky panky. What's wrong with you, bro? What y'all thought Putin was gonna hit the ground or something? He looked over his shoulder, just let y'all know, hey, he taking notice. But guess what? Alaska is surrounded with nuclear weapons. Don't get stupid. Right. Hey. Revolutionary salute to our brother One Well for gifting 5 core figure memberships to the audience. Revolutionary Way of Life. Absolutely appreciate the love, family. Those who got them, try to keep them and help us keep the lights on. Here's the House of Revolution. Absolutely appreciate the love, family. Salute. But yeah, y'all know that was disrespectful, bro. They weren't supposed to be flying no bombers over that man's head like that. You know?
Did you underestimate Ukraine? President Putin, will you stop killing civilians?
He brushed it off like a G. Just let him know he's seen it. Wasn't worried about it.
President Putin, how can the U.S. trust your words?
Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Go around
When the world wasn't expecting that. Then they got in the presidential. Then they got in the presidential. Putin ain't tripping. They tell Putin get in. Putin like, man, I ride with y'all. Think I am? I ride with him. We got eyes on this vehicle, man. You know, and people was talking about that. Oh, what is Putin? What is Trump doing? Driving with Putin? Yeah, they want to ride with Putin. All the world leaders, which they was the ones on that stage right there, getting all that legendary shine, but they not. And they sitting there lying and talk about it. I heard them lying say Trump was bringing Putin out of isolation. I laughed at that. That good dinner, man. It's in the air. isolated. Boy, Putin is the hero to the world. It's Trump trying to get his respect back and get America back right with the motherfucking world.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States of America and the President of the Russian Federation.
I appreciate you, soldier.
Уважаемый господин президент,
Mr. President,
дамы и господа,
ladies and gentlemen,
наши переговоры
our negotiations
конструктивной и
have been held in a constructive
взаимоуважительной атмосфере.
atmosphere of mutual
Были
respect.
весьма
We
обстоятельными
had
и
very
полезными.
thorough negotiations that were quite useful. I would like to thank once again my American counterpart
Предложение
for the
приехать на
proposal
Аляску.
to travel out here to
Вполне
Alaska.
логично
It only
It
встретиться
only
именно
makes
Peace
sense
alert.
that we
Look at
have
them.
here.
нашей страны.
We got Putin and Trump talking about peace alert, y'all. They down with us now. Good.
Our
Хоть нас
countries,
разделяют
want unity
океаны,
though
in the
на самом
separated by the
деле
oceans,
близкие
are
соседи.
close neighbors.
И когда мы встретились,
So when we've met,
вышли из самолетов, я так
when I
сказал:
came out of the plane and I've said,
добрый день, дорогой
good
сосед,
afternoon, dear
очень
neighbor.
приятно видеть вас
Very good to see you
в добром здравии
in good
и
health
живым.
and to see you
И
alive.
по-соседски это очень
I think that is very
звучит,
neighborly.
по-моему, по-доброму.
And I think that's some
Нас разделяет только
kind words that we
Берингов
can
пролив.
say
Да
to
и
each
то,
other.
там два
We're
острова
separated by the Strait of
между
Bering, though there are two islands
российским
only
и
between the Russian
американским
island
островом.
and
Всего
the
4
US island. They're
километра.
only 4
Мы
kilometers
близкие
apart.
соседи.
We're close neighbors,
Важно
and it's a
также,
fact.
что с Аляской связана
It's also
значительная
important
часть
that
общей
Alaska
истории
has to
России
do with our
и
common
США.
heritage,
Многие
common history between
позитивные
Russia and the
события.
US, and
Так
many
здесь и
positive
по
events
сей день
have to do with that
сохраняется
territory.
огромное культурное
Still, there is
наследие
tremendous
после русской империи.
cultural heritage back
Православные
from the Russian
храмы,
America. For example,
множество,
Orthodox
более
churches
700
and a
географических
lot of
названий,
more than
имеющих русское
700
происхождение.
geographical names of Russian
В
origin.
ходе Второй мировой войны
During the
именно на
Second World
Аляске
War, it was
начиналась
here in
легендарная
Alaska that was the
авиамагистраль
origin
для
of the
поставок
legendary
боевых
air bridge
самолетов
for
и
the
другой
supply of
техники
military
по
aircraft and
договору
other equipment
Ленд-Лиза.
under the Land-Lease
Это был
program.
опасный,
It was a
сложный
dangerous
маршрут
and treacherous
над
route
громадными ледяными
over the
пространствами.
vast
Но летчики и
emptiness of
специалисты двух стран
ice.
делали все,
However, the
чтобы
pilots of
приблизить
both
победу,
countries did everything
рисковали,
to bring closer the
отдавали
victory.
свои жизни
They
в
risked
общей
their
победе.
lives and
Вот
they
я
gave it all
сейчас
for the
только
common
что был
victory.
в городе Магадане,
I
в
was just
России, там
in the city of
памятник
Magadan in Russia, and there is a
российским и
memorial
американским
there dedicated to
What
the
he
Russian and the
talking about?
US pilots.
российский
And
и
there are two
американский.
flags, the
Я знаю,
US
что
flag
и
and the Russian
здесь
flag. And I know
тоже
that
есть
here
такой
as
же
well,
памятник. На
there is
военном
such a
кладбище
memorial.
всего в нескольких километрах отсюда.
There is
I can guarantee you, Trump and many other Americans in there have no idea what Putin is talking about. CIA and them type of people, only few, the Russians do, because they absolutely are devoid of real history. Putin giving them a history lesson, and they all just sitting there amazed.
a military
Захороненные
burial
советские
place
пилоты,
several kilometers away
погибшие
from
при
here.
выполнении
The
той
Soviet
героической
pilots that
миссии.
buried there who
Признательны
died during that
американским
dangerous
властям и
mission. We're
гражданам за
thankful to the
бережное
citizens and the
отношение к их
government of the
памяти.
US for
Это выглядит
carefully taking
достойно
care
и
of their
благородно.
memory. I think
Мы
that's
всегда
very
будем
worthy and
помнить
noble.
другие
We'll
исторические
always
примеры,
remember
когда
other
наши
historical
страны
examples
вместе
when our
громили
countries
общих врагов в
defeated
духе
common
боевого
enemies together
товарищества и
in the spirit of
союзничества,
battle
оказывали друг
camaraderie and
другу помощь и
allyship
поддержку.
that supported each
Это
other and
наследие, уверен,
facilitated
будет нам
each other.
помогать
I'm sure that this
восстанавливать,
heritage will
выстраивать
help us rebuild and
взаимовыгодные,
foster
равноправные
mutually
связи
beneficial and
уже
equal
на новом
ties
этапе, даже
at
в
this
самых
new stage,
непростых
even
условиях.
during the hardest
Как
conditions.
известно, российско-американские
It is
встречи в
known that
верхах
there have
не
been
проводились более
no
4
summits
лет.
between Russia and the
Это
US for
большой
4
срок.
years, and
Минувший
that's
период
a
был
long
очень
time.
непростым для двухсторонних
This time
отношений.
was very
И
hard
скажем
for
прямо,
bilateral
они
relations, and
скатились
let's be
до
frank,
самой низкой
they've fallen
точки
to
со
the
времен
lowest
Холодной войны,
point
и это
since
не идет на
the Cold
пользу
War.
ни нашим
I think
странам, да,
that's
и
not
миру
benefiting
в
our
целом.
countries and the world as a
Очевидно,
whole.
что рано или
It is
поздно
apparent
нужно
that
было
sooner or
выправлять
later
ситуацию,
we had
переходить
to
от
amend the
конфронтации к
situation
диалогу.
to move on
И
from
в
the
этом плане
confrontation
личная
to
встреча
dialogue.
глав
And in
двух
this case, a
государств
personal
реально
meeting
назрела.
between the heads
Конечно,
of state
с
has
условием
been long
серьезной и
overdue.
кропотливой
Naturally,
подготовки. И такая
under the
работа
condition of
в целом
serious and
была
painstaking work,
проделана.
this
У
work
нас
has
с
been done in
президентом
general.
Трампом установились
Me and
очень
President
хорошие
Trump have
прямые
very good
контакты.
direct
Мы
contact.
неоднократно
We've
и
spoken
откровенно
multiple times. We spoke
разговаривали по
frankly
телефону.
on the phone.
К нам, как известно, в Россию несколько раз приезжал
And
спецпредставитель
Special Envoy envoy of the president, Mr. Witkoff, traveled out to Russia several times. Our advisors and heads of foreign ministries kept in touch all the time. And you know fully well that one of the central issues was the situation around Ukraine. We see the strive of the administration and President Trump personally to help facilitate the resolution of the Ukrainian conflict, and his strive to get to the crux of the matter, to understand its history, is precious. As I've said, the situation in Ukraine has to do with fundamental threats to our security. Moreover, we've always considered the Ukrainian nation, and I've said it multiple times, a brotherly nation, however strange it may sound in these conditions. We have the same roots, and everything that's happening is a tragedy for us, a terrible wound. Therefore, the country is sincerely interested in putting an end to it. At the same time, we're convinced that in order to make the settlement lasting and long-term, we need to eliminate all the primary roots, the primary causes of that conflict, and we've said it multiple times, to consider all legitimate concerns of Russia and to reinstate a just balance of security in Europe and in the world on the whole. And I agree with President Trump, as he has said today, that naturally the security of Ukraine should be ensured as well. Naturally, we are prepared to work on that.
That's called telling somebody to their face. He's on American soil in front of the American president, and he just said, you want peace? We're going to get to the root causes of what started this war. He just told them to his face and told all the Americans. They can't get around that. They can't pretend like they don't know what does Putin want. He just told you. Peace come with the root causes. What's the root causes? Nazis in Ukraine. Ukraine talk about joining NATO. CIA biological and chemical weapons laboratories in Ukraine. Ukraine being armed and trained to fight the Russians. NATO getting too close to Russia's border. Those are the root causes of the war. So Putin smiling, shaking hands, but he stuck to all his people love to hear that because that's what they want to hear. We can get to peace, but you're going to deal with everything we said. The Nazis, the NATO, the Ukraine being armed and trained to fight us, the biological and chemical war. Ain't no peace unless we deal with that. That's what he just said, basically.
I would like to hope that the agreement that we've reached together will help us bring closer that goal and will pave the path towards peace in Ukraine. We expect that Kiev and European capitals will perceive that constructively and that they won't throw a wrench in the works. They will not make any attempts to use some backroom dealings to conduct provocations to torpedo the nascent progress. Incidentally, when the new administration came to power, bilateral trade started to grow. It's still very symbolic. Still, we have a growth of 20%. As I've said, we have a lot of dimensions for joint work. It is clear that U.S. and Russian investment and business cooperation has tremendous potential. Russia and the U.S. can offer each other so much in trade, digital, high-tech, and in space exploration. We see that Arctic cooperation is also very possible. And our international context, for example, between the Far East of Russia and the West Coast of the U.S. Overall, it's very important for our countries to turn the page, to go back to cooperation. It is symbolic that not far away from here, at the border between Russia and the U.S., there is a so-called international date line. I think you can step over literally from yesterday into tomorrow. And I hope that we'll succeed in that in political sphere. I would like to thank President Trump for our joint work, for the well-wishing and trustworthy tone of our conversation. It's important that both sides are result-oriented, and we see that the President of the U.S. has a very clear idea of what he would like to achieve. He sincerely cares about prosperity of his nation. Still, he understands that Russia has its own national interests. I expect that today's agreements will be the starting point, not only for the solution of the Ukrainian issue, but also will help us bring back business-like and pragmatic relations between Russia and the U.S. And in the end, I would like to add one more thing. I'd like to remind you that in 2022, during the last contact with the previous administration, I tried to convince my previous American colleague that
ситуации
the situation should not be
после наступления, которые могут наступить
brought to
тяжелые
the point
последствия в виде
of no
боевых
return
действий.
when it would come
И
to
прямо сказал
hostilities.
тогда,
And I
что
said
это
it quite
большая
directly back
ошибка.
then that it's a big
И
mistake.
вот сегодня мы слышим, когда президент Трамп
Today,
говорит,
when
что если бы
President
я
Trump
был
saying that
президентом, то войны
if he
бы
was
не
the
было.
president back then, there will be
Я
no
думаю,
war.
что так бы
And I'm
на самом
quite
деле
sure that it would
случилось. Я
indeed be so.
подтверждаю
I
это,
can confirm that.
потому что в целом у
I
нас
think that
с
overall,
президентом Трампом
me and President
наладился
Trump
очень хороший
have built a very
деловой и
good
доверительный
business-like and
контакт.
trustworthy
И
contact.
у меня есть все основания
And I have
полагать, что
every
двигаясь
reason
по
to
этому
believe that
пути, мы
moving down
можем
this path,
дойти и до,
we can come,
чем быстрее, тем лучше,
and the sooner the
до
better,
завершения
to
конфликта
the
в
end
Украине.
of the conflict
Благодарю
in
вас
Ukraine.
за
Thank you.
внимание.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. That was very profound. And I will say that I believe we had a very productive meeting. There were many, many points that we agreed on, most of them, I would say, a couple of big ones that we haven't quite gotten there, but we've made some headway. So there's no deal until there's a deal. I will call up NATO in a little while. I will call up the various people that I think are appropriate. And I'll, of course, call up President Zelensky and tell him about today's meeting. It's ultimately up to them. They're going to have to agree with what Marco and Steve and some of the great people from the Trump administration who've come here, Scott and John Ratcliffe. Thank you very much. But we have some of our really great leaders. They've been doing a phenomenal job. We also have some tremendous Russian business representatives here. And I think, you know, everybody wants to deal with us. We've become the hottest country anywhere in the world in a very short period of time. And we look forward to that. We look forward to dealing. We're going to try and get this over with. We really made some great progress today. I've always had a fantastic relationship with President Putin, with Vladimir. We had many
Vladimir like that.
tough meetings, good meetings. We were interfered with by the Russia hoax that made it a little bit tougher to deal with, but he understood it. I think he's probably seen things like that during the course of his career. He's seen it all, but we had to put up with the Russia hoax. He knew it was a hoax, and I knew it was a hoax, but what was done was very criminal. But it made it harder for us to deal as a country in terms of the business and all of the things that we'd like to have dealt with. But we'll have a good chance when this is over. So just to put it very quickly, I'm going to start making a few phone calls and tell them what happened. But we had an extremely productive meeting and many points were agreed to. There are just a very few that are left. Some are not that significant. One is probably the most significant, but we have a very good chance of getting there. We didn't get there, but we have a very good chance of getting there. I would like to thank President Putin and his entire team, who I know in many cases, other than that, whose faces I get to see all the time in the newspapers. You're almost as famous as the boss, but especially this one right over here. But we had some good meetings over the years, right? Good productive meetings over the years, and we hope to have that in the future. But let's do the most productive one right now. We're going to stop really 5, 6, 7,000, thousands of people a week from being killed, and President Putin wants to see that as much as I do. So again, Mr. President, I'd like to thank you very much, and we'll speak to you very soon and probably see you again very soon. Thank you very much, Vladimir.
Next time in Moscow.
Oh, that's an interesting one. I don't know. I'll get a little heat on that one, but I could see it possibly happening. Thank you very much, Vladimir. And thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
President Trump and President Putin are now recovering from the meeting that they had earlier today. We finally had the big meeting. We've been looking forward to what's going to happen when Trump and Putin themselves get together and meet. We've been speculating on all kinds of things. Well, now we have some actual commentary from the two to try to figure out what actually did happen. Now, there's not a whole lot of answers because neither men took any question during the press conference. But Trump had said before this thing started that if it goes short, if it's quick, like I'll know within 2 minutes, he said, if there's going to be a productive meeting or not. And he said, if it's short, then I'm just going to give a solo press conference. But if it goes longer and it's a joint press conference, then that's going to be a good sign. Well, that's what happened. It was 3 hours was the meeting that they had together. And the two sides did have a joint press conference. Both men made a short commentary. It wasn't a whole lot by either, but there were some things that were said. And I think that we can at least have an educated guess as to what may have been happening behind the scenes and can give you a kind of a decent idea about what may be coming next. Now, as you're seeing there on the screen, those were some of the visuals that happened before the meeting began. You had this really lengthy red carpet. It was kind of interesting. This is on a U.S. Air Force base in Alaska. And Putin seemed really happy at the beginning. In fact, the two men looked like almost like old buddies kind of getting together. And I know that's not going to play well in Ukraine. He's certainly Trump is going to be pillared in many outlets in the United States because he always has that reputation of cozying up to dictators, et cetera. But listen, I mean, we just got to say this right off the top. If you want to hold up the sample of what not to do, look to the Biden administration. They refused ever from the time the war began until he left office to even talk to Putin, much let alone even try to find a negotiated settlement. And people can say Trump is talking to dictators, he's whatever term you want to use, but he is talking, and he's making us, for the first time since this war broke out, to actually have a legitimate shot at having it ended. Now, we'll see if that ends up being successful or not. But President Trump deserves credit for giving it his very best, because he is literally the only Western leader on the planet that is actively trying to bring the war to an end. And I can just tell you from some sources I have in Ukraine, whatever Zelensky may say at the official level, and certainly many of the others in Ukraine that do want the war to continue on and don't want to give in to anything, there are a significant number of people at all levels, from the government officials all the way down to regular people, that just want the death and destruction in the war to end. So I think that privately, a lot of them will be hopeful, but as we're going to see, it's a little too early for celebration. It's a little too early to say anything definitive from this, but it is a chance to say something. So let's take a look first. We're going to look at a number of things that Vladimir Putin said, and then we're going to look at what President Trump had to say and see if we can figure out where it's going next. First of all, President Putin said, I think one of the most important things of this whole press conference, it's still the root causes.
We're convinced that in order to make the settlement lasting and long-term, we need to eliminate all the primary roots, the primary causes of that conflict. And we've said it multiple times, to consider all legitimate concerns of Russia and to reinstate a just balance of security in Europe and in the world on the whole. And I agree with President Trump, as he has said today, that naturally the security of Ukraine should be ensured as well. Naturally, we are prepared to work on that. I would like to hope that the agreement that we've reached together will help us bring closer that goal and will pave the path towards peace in Ukraine. We expect that Kiev and European capitals will perceive that constructively and that they won't throw a wrench in the works. They will not make any attempts to use some backroom dealings to conduct provocations to torpedo the nascent progress.
Okay, a lot to unpack right there. Putin starts off by saying, listen, we're looking for a negotiated end. We do want this war to come to an end. And we're looking for an end state that everybody has a chance for security, whether that's the United States, it's Russia, of course, Europe, he specifies. He even says, yes, it even includes Ukraine. So whatever end state Ukraine's going to end up looking in, he says, look, we want a deal to where everybody has security, i.e., we're not looking to just get Ukraine off the map here so we can come roll into the West and then going after the next war. Now, of course, people will say, well, of course he's going to say that. He's just going to say whatever he needs to in order to, to trick us all, et cetera. Nobody has to get tricked here. Nobody is going to get tricked here. Let me just be blunt on that. You already see Europe's in the midst of a rebuilding and a rearmament program. You've seen the NATO Secretary Mark Rutte talking about how we've got to get ready quick. We've got to start. Everybody's got to spend up to 5% of GDP. None of that is going to change. Nobody's going to be. It's not like as though if peace breaks out in Ukraine that everybody in NATO is going to go, oh, okay, cool. We don't have to spend any more money. Then we can go back to the way it was. They're not going to do that. In fact, no one's going to trust Putin. No one should trust Putin. Nobody in the West should trust their national security to Putin saying something nice. Let's be clear about that. This is not about trusting anything, but this is about words do matter, and words and actions matter more. And when you see the Russians saying, look, we're looking to get this thing over with, and we're looking for an architecture that can have the thing so that everybody can live in peace. And as you're going to see subsequent comments he said in a minute, he puts even more action behind that, because one of the big elements of his travel party were business people. This is not just a foreign policy, foreign affairs, Secretary of State kind of thing, get together and like military people, et cetera. They included a lot of business people because they're looking beyond this, something that's going to actually put action behind the words that he's looking for peace and security for them. That's number one. Second thing he also said in that one there is that, look, we have an agreement. So he seems to imply that at least tentatively between Trump and Putin, he said that we have an agreement. And then he's concerned that those in Ukraine and in Europe may try and sabotage this and undercut it. And we're going to see from some of the comments Trump makes, that's probably not an unreasonable concern that he may have, but that is a concern that he has. So he's looking for an end to the war negotiation. It's going to have the root causes. So don't think this is going to be pretty for the Ukraine side. Nothing basically has changed since June of 2024, when Putin very clearly articulated exactly what it was going to take. It was reiterated at the second Istanbul meeting in July, where he had those 12-point peace plans. None of that, I'm sure, has changed. He kind of implied here, this is like we've been saying a lot. You had Sergei Lavrov saying, we're coming in to talk, and we've already been talking about this before. There's nothing new in what we're going to be talking about. So all of those terms that many in Ukraine will not like, Zelensky will hate, Europeans will hate, I got it. But that's still better than ignoring all of that and continuing to fight for the reasons that I pointed out, because that's the other thing Russia has always said, and we can only assume that it's still true. If they don't get the diplomatic solution that they're looking for here, then they'll simply continue to fight until they conquer it, however long that may take. So that was the first part there. Then and Putin says, again, he says, okay, words are important too, but you got to come through with the action.
The well-wishing and trustworthy tone of our conversation, it's important that both sides are result-oriented, and we see that the president of the U.S. has a very clear idea of what he would like to achieve. He sincerely cares about prosperity of his nation. Still, he understands that Russia has its own national interests. I expect that today's agreements will be the starting point, not only for the solution of the Ukrainian issue, but also will help us bring back business-like and pragmatic relations between Russia and the U.S.
So, like we've been talking in the last several days, the Russians are looking beyond this war. Actually, we've been talking about this for months. Russia's not just looking to, quote, conquer Ukraine. They're looking to have a diplomatic end to this, and they're looking specifically with the United States, ever since Trump came into office, about resetting relations, because Russia is going to exist no matter what. However this war comes to an end, but whether soon, later, medium, whether through negotiations or through battling out on the battlefield, Russia's still going to be there. America's still going to be there. Europe's still going to be there. So he's looking beyond this and saying, hey, we've got to figure out how to live and do something that's pragmatic and positive for both sides. It's also important, let me just point out there, because that last image, you can see it pretty quick when the camera zoomed back, is it says up there, pursuing peace, right? So that shows you that's what the Americans set up. This is on our soil here. So that is Trump's indication, her preference. He wants this to have a peaceful resolution. He's not looking to continue on and to fight the war. Putin himself is looking to have peace and to have things resolved so that the whole continent, and to include the United States as well, can at least get into some stability. Nobody has any fantasies about everybody's going to be best friends, and that the Europeans and the Ukrainians and the Russians and the Americans, everybody's going to be fine after this. they can be, over time, we can get back into a stable relationship, something that's useful and healthy and has win-win opportunities and gets the possibility of nuclear war off the table. That should animate everything that we're doing here. And hopefully, God willing, we'll get enough leaders in the West that can acknowledge the fundamentals that the war can never be won by the Ukraine side. And the longer it goes, the more of them will die and the more land they'll lose, and the worse the terms will eventually be. That should be crystal clear by now. And it seems that Putin and Trump recognize that. That's helpful. So let's go on. Now, in terms of looking beyond, and I told you a lot of the President Putin's travel party included businessmen. He spoke specifically about the business opportunities.
We have a lot of dimensions for joint work. It is clear that the US and Russian investment and business potential offer each other so much in trade, digital, high tech, and in space exploration. We see that Arctic cooperation is also very possible, and our international context, for example, between the Far East of Russia and the West Coast of the US. Overall, it's very important for our countries to turn the page.
It's very important, he says, to turn the page. Now, again, looking at this from the Ukrainian perspective, I know a lot of them, and anybody who's down on Russia will say, well, yeah, of course he does. He wants to get this war off the table because it's costing him so much. It's a big anchor on their economy. And I'm sure that there's elements of truth in all of that. But the fact is, the page must be turned, because to refuse that, again, I consider it to be immoral. What Ukraine and the European Union, or what the Biden administration before that were doing, whereas they refused to acknowledge and accept any kind of diplomatic off-ramp that was available and that could have eased the Ukrainian suffering, could have lowered their casualty count. It could have minimized how much they had to pay for the conditions that were going to be left over at the end. But instead, they continued to ignore all of that and continue on. They didn't want to turn the page. In fact, they wanted the page to stay right where it was at. And they didn't seem to care, or some still don't, that the Ukrainian people are the bill payers for that abject refusal. Hopefully, President Trump will have the stamina and the courage to say, yo, y'all can all pound sand. Every one of you guys who want to keep the page where it's at, you either get on board or figure it out yourself, because we're not going to stay on the same page here. And we're not going to precipitate and participate in the continued destruction of the Ukrainian territory, land, and people. Hopefully, that's where Trump is going to go. One other thing I think was really important that Putin did say that's worth pointing out here is that he seemed to agree with Trump that had Trump been in office, then there wouldn't have been a war in the first place. And something that he says here is really important about a meeting he had with Biden in June of 2021, which I'll talk about on the backside of this. Watch this clip.
I'd like to remind you that in 2022, during the last contact with the previous administration, I tried to convince my previous American colleague that the situation should not be brought to the point of no return when it would come to hostilities. And I said it quite directly back then, that it's a big mistake. Today, when President Trump is saying that if he was the president back then, there will be no war. And I'm quite sure that it would indeed be so. I can confirm that. I think that overall, me and President Trump have built a very good business-like and trustworthy contact.
So you see President Putin there disparaging the meeting that he had prior to the breakout of the war in February 2022 with Trump's immediate predecessor, which of course is President Joe Biden. Now, I think I've mentioned here in earlier episodes a few months back that I talked to a diplomatic friend of the United States in Washington, D.C., who has some direct knowledge about the events that took place during that meeting. And in that time, the President Putin told President Biden in no uncertain terms that if NATO continues to push into Ukraine, and if Ukraine continues to have that law in the books that says they will recover all of their lost territories, to include Crimea, by whatever means necessary, He said, we're not going to let that happen. We will use military force to prevent that from happening. Those two things are unacceptable to us. The Minsk agreements were never put into place. The Western/Ukraine side never implemented the most important thing to us, which is limited autonomy for the Donbass and the Russian-speaking people in that area to change the constitution. They never did that. And then now that you're still pressing forward. And if you keep doing it, there's going to be conflict. And President Biden, according to my source, said, yeah, do whatever you want to do. If you try that, then we're going to sanction the hell out of your country. We're going to crush your economy, et cetera. Basically taunting Putin and saying, yeah, whatever. So Putin said, Roger that. I see. This is what we're going to do then. And we know how it turned out here. But what he's saying is if I had President Trump as a partner at the time, he says, I think we could have worked something out. And he's trying to put actions behind it and show that right now Trump is in office and perhaps the two of them can get to a place where they can bring this war to an end. So President Putin wants to get it to an end. We got to get past this deal, folks, on the Western side, that we can't, quote, let Putin win. That's already past tense. You can't undo that now. It's done. It's like you dropped an egg on the ground and it's sitting there. The yolks are all mixed up and you say, we can't let that egg break. It's already on the ground. The shells are scattered everywhere. It's done. You can't undo it. So stop trying, because all you're going to do is get more eggs broken in the process here. So it's time to wake up for our side, because the Russians, from a position of strength, are not trying to move their strength onto the battlefield further. They could say, you know what, forget it. We've tried the negotiations. We've tried talking with y'all. We're not even going to try it, Trump or no Trump. And even if it takes us another year or 2 years, we're going to keep going until we destroy your country. They could say that, but they're not. They're still saying we're willing to get this thing over with negotiations. I think we have a partner in the United States that we can deal with. And for the people of Ukraine, I certainly hope they're successful. Let's shift gears now to President Trump, because he also said some interesting things. First of all, after this, he called it a good meeting.
Just to put it very quickly, I'm going to start making a few phone calls and tell them what happened. But we had an extremely productive meeting and many points were agreed to. There are just a very few that are left. Some are not that significant. One is probably the most significant. But we have a very good chance of getting there. We didn't get there, but we have a very good chance of getting there. I would like to thank President Putin and his entire team.
So Trump says, there was many points agreed to, and there's apparently some sticking point. I'm sure he would have loved to get to some point to where the two sides could say, hey, we have agreed to this. This is a good step, because both President Trump and Putin, prior to this meeting, both signaled that they didn't expect this to be like a definitive summit that was going to answer all the questions, but that it was going to be a start in a process. It appears, at least in that regard, it came out like they expected it to. But President Trump says, look, we have a number of things agreed to, but there's some sticking points here, but it was still very productive, very positive. Now, in diplomatic terms, this is a good deal. This is a good meeting here, because as long as the two sides didn't break apart and move in opposite directions, or, Trump come out and said, all right, I throw my hands up. I didn't get what I want, so I'm going to level more sanctions and we're not going to talk to them. So that would have been bad. But as many people have said, I think Winston Churchill is the one that coined it, talk is better than war. Now, unfortunately, in this case, the conflict does continue on. But as long as there are conversations and discussions, then the chance to end the war stays on the table. And the date for this war to come to an end could be moved up and shortened. And that's exactly what we're hoping for. But the devil's in the details. And President Trump was pretty honest about this and saying, I'm going to have to make some phone calls. I'm going to have to get on the phone with Zelensky. Probably by the time we're doing this video here, he's probably either on the phone with him now or may have already talked to him. We might know something on that later tonight. And then he's also going to talk to European leaders. Maybe he'll get on the phone with them all together. But whatever these issues are, he's going to try to come to a point to where he's going to say, hey, we've got to agree to this kind of stuff. We've got to get these things done here. And I think President Trump sees that there's going to be some difficulty there. And I think he's aware of how big the challenges are, not the least of which is because of the phone call they had on Wednesday before this meeting, where I'm sure all the European leaders, and we saw many of their comments afterwards, where they were emphatically telling him no territorial concessions, no bypassing security guarantees, keeping the door open for NATO, no demilitarization, no denazification. Other than that, we're in complete agreement. Obviously, those are virtually the entire opposite of everything that the Russians are pitching. So that's what they want, which is the opposite nearly of what Trump wants, because that won't end the war. That will keep the page sit there. It will not be turned. Now comes the hard part for Trump on his own side. Oddly enough, working with the Russian side is something that's more amenable, but working with our side is not. And as Trump said, until you get a deal, you got no deal.
There's no deal until there's a deal. I will call up NATO in a little while. I will call up the various people that I think are appropriate. And I'll, of course, call up President Zelensky and tell him about today's meeting. It's ultimately up to them. They're going to have to agree with what Marco and Steve and some of the great people from the Trump administration who've come here. We also have some tremendous Russian business representatives here. And I think, everybody wants to deal with us. We've become the hottest country anywhere in the world in a very short period of time. And we look forward to that. We look forward to dealing.
Let's see. That's that's Trump talking about how he's going to have to talk all these people. He's going to have to convince them stuff. But he said, look, everybody wants to do business with us. And certainly in that regard, he's right. He's just going to have to see if he can get past the emotional baggage that the West has, that they are so stuck and so myopically focused on what we want that we're not willing to look at the bigger picture. We're not willing to look beyond today and see that it's harming all of our collective interests, as well as, of course, Ukraine's paying the biggest price on this. But Trump's going to have to try and move all them even further down the line. And he seems aware of how hard that's going to be. And he's probably in the process of finding that out right now. Now, as I said, this the fact that this ended on an amiable note, that the two men agreed to have a joint press conference. Nobody just, talked negatively about the other. They didn't contradict one another, etc. And then at the very end, President Trump said, "Hey, you know what? Let's look forward to the next meeting."
Again, Mr. President, I'd like to thank you very much, and we'll speak to you very soon, and probably see you again very soon. Thank you very much, Vladimir.
Next time in Moscow.
Oh, that's an interesting one. I don't know. I'll get a little heat on that one, but I could see it possibly happening. Thank you very much, Vladimir. And thank you all.
That was very interesting. So Vladimir Putin responded not with the translator, but in English directly to Trump. We'll see the next one in Moscow. And the Russians had signaled even before this meeting began that they hoped that there would be subsequent meetings. And they did say that I saw actually in some of the Russian media that the idea was already floated that they would like to invite Trump into Moscow. It was also heading into this meeting, one of the things that Trump was shooting for was to be able to set the conditions for a Trump, Putin, and Zelensky meeting, because Trump even said, look, until we get Zelensky in part of this, I can't make a deal for Ukraine. I can't agree to anything for Ukraine. I can tell you what we're going to do, but I can't tell you what they're going to do. He's going to have to be here. Now, of course, that is the biggest impediment, and the most difficult is going to happen for this to happen for Zelensky, because he is adamantly opposed to anything. He does not want to give anything away. He wants to keep security guarantees. He still wants to, you can call it nothing besides fiction, that he's not going to give any territorial concessions away, that they want to have some de facto or not de jure, etc. But I just don't see how any of that stuff's going to fly. I don't know that Zelensky's going to agree to anything, to give anything away. So I think that's probably Trump's number one biggest difficulty, even more so than the European leaders, all of them together. That may be the difficult time, because for Zelensky to show up somewhere at a meeting and be able to say, wow, this is something that I'm willing to give away, it would cause a lot of angst. And there's been many people who have speculated that because of the hardcore right inside the Zelensky's bubble would be so opposed to that it's not entirely possible he would not be the victim of a coup under his own government. I don't have enough information to say whether that's valid or not. Only that it seems to come from a number of different sources that is a much bigger pressure on Zelensky than many in the West seem to recognize. I can't say for sure about that, but what I can say very confidently we've seen now for 3.5 years is and actually you can go back more than actually since 2019, since he's been in office, he has just been adamant on not submitting to anything that the Russians said, not to keep war from coming in the first place, not to get it off the table in 2022, 2023, 2024, or today. He has been opposed to it, and you can speculate yourself about what the reasons may be. But what we know for a fact is that he has been unwilling to compromise on any point at all to bring this war to a conclusion. A couple of points I want to make real quick here before letting you go tonight. Just some observations. Trump really seemed tired at this. He didn't have much energy. One can imagine he's been traveling around. Certainly it was a long plane ride, and then 3 hours of probably very intense conversations. But he seems very motivated to wanting to get this over. But he really did seem kind of very low on energy at the end there, whereas Putin seemed quite energetic. He seemed quite full of energy and certainly eager to get on to the next phases on this. So hopefully they can continue to move that to get it to a new meeting and to finally to an end. One other thing that's important to point out here, Putin is, I've seen a lot of people talk about this in the last 24 hours or so. Putin is just really good at his KGB upbringing and training, and he is very famous and well known for studying the people that he talks to very, very carefully. And he knows the right language to use. He knows their pressure points. He knows what makes them happy, et cetera. And there's no doubt that he was using a lot of that, a lot of flattery stuff. Ask Mark Rutte about flattery and how some leaders in the world use that. Ask Keir Starmer. A lot of them were good. Most leaders try to do that because they know that's something that gets Trump's motivation up. So Putin was certainly doing the same thing. You see that on Trump's own cabinet. A lot of people use that same kind of tactic. So just understand where that's coming from. So like I said earlier, we don't take Putin at his word for anything, but we do listen to his words. And when his words and his actions line up and match, and it could lead to something that's a benefit to the United States, that's something we need to pay attention to. And it is in America's interest to get this war over with quickly as possible. It's in Europe's interest to get this war over with as quickly as possible. And even though it's not in Zelensky's personal preference, it is in the interest of the Ukrainian people to get the destruction and the dying over with as soon as possible. And we certainly wish the president well. Now, I may be back to you later tonight. I'm not sure because President Trump is going to be on Sean Hannity on Fox News later tonight. And, those two are old friends. And
it's a weird pattern with the Trump court. Now you have to have an IC Republican guy who was just walking.
This is it. As soon as Putin lands, they'll do him in, they'll kidnap him, they'll grab him in for the ICC, whatever the case may be, right? It's all a trap, which I didn't believe that for 1 second. It's a different kinds of traps. Oh, it's a trap. They'll get them there and they'll say you have to take this deal, and if you don't, we'll throw 1 million sanctions at you. There were a lot of pessimism, and let's face it, if we're honest here, if we're intellectually honest, based on what the U.S. empire does, it's not unreasonable. It's not unreasonable to be pessimistic. However, there's nothing wrong with optimism too, and certainly with pushing for peace. with pushing for something good to happen out of this. It appears, I've been listening to this stuff, that there was some kind of an agreement made. We don't know what it is. Trump's now saying he's going to call the people in Europe. Well, we already know their position, but let's start with what's happening. Caleb, so let's talk about what you've been doing. I know you've been doing street work on this and other things. Talk about what's happening. You talk about your street work, what kind of reactions you got, etc.
Oh, well, as the meeting was taking place, we were in the streets of New York City, and we got a pretty positive reaction. There were people who actually stopped and joined the rally. There was a Republican guy who was just walking by, and he joined the rally, and he spoke up. He liked what we were saying. There were other people that stopped and appreciated what we had to say. And yeah, I mean, it was quite exciting to be out there. And look, I think today was a big step forward. Part of the reason why is, you'll remember, Trump said he'll know within the first 2 minutes if the meeting is worth it or not. And at the end of the meeting today, he said it was pretty positive. So he would have known within the first 2 minutes. The Russian president was also very, very positive about it. The second meeting is already in the works. This is a really, really big step forward. All those people that were saying that they thought, like, Putin was going to get killed. Do they think Putin's stupid? Do they think he's stupid enough that he's going to walk himself into a situation like that? And let's remember, the International Criminal Court, the ICC, that's one of the big differences between some of the liberals and Trump, right? George Soros was instrumental in setting up the ICC. He's the one who funded it. And the USA has never signed on to it. And it's funny, I used to work for Ramsey Clark, the former U.S. Attorney General. He was one of the biggest critics of the ICC. He said if there had been any notion of the ICC existing, the UN would never have been created. If any country had any notion there was going to be an international criminal court, now you have to have an ICJ, right? Countries have to be able to sue each other. If somebody, harms somebody else, you have to be able to work that through that. But the ICC, the idea of one world court with sovereignty over the whole world, we can arrest anyone, anywhere in the world if we think they committed a crime. No country would agree to that. And when George Soros set that up, it was they created the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia. Was what set the precedent for it. And that was a hoax. That was a complete pack of lies. Samantha Power made her career making war propaganda to bomb Serbia. And then with that precedent, they then created the ICC. To this day, now not counting the International Criminal Tribunal of Yugoslavia, but the actual ICC, every single person ever convicted in The Hague by the ICC has been African. Every single one. You want to talk about you want to talk about a bias. I mean, my goodness, right? Every single person convicted there is from one particular continent. I mean, that is particularly ridiculous. And that continent, they're just doing great now that the ICC locked up a bunch of people. Ever since the ICC came into existence, Africa's been going great. I mean, give me a break. So yeah, I had no fear that was going to happen. I was concerned. I mean, the behavior of the press today was reprehensible. I mean, the press was, my goodness. Did you see that? What do you think?
Well, I know, the press titutes, as they call them, the prostitutes, their job. We know their job. Their job is to do what their masters tell them. It's to say, go after Putin, stand up to Putin, push Putin, blah, blah, blah. They are the press is the mouthpiece of the neocons. And more often than not now, the mouthpiece of the Democratic Party or the neocons in the Republican Party. So we know what they're going to do. Now, what I'd like to do, I was just talking to my buddy Pedro on the phone.
Okay.
What I'd like to do, Caleb, is let's show, if you don't mind, can we go ahead and show the video? Caleb has some video of what they were doing in the street, the stuff they were holding up. And let's look at some reactions, see what people in the streets were thinking when they were doing this. All right, and let's get all the way down here so they can really see it.
That we are in extreme historic times right now. President Trump is currently in the great state of Alaska, attempting to make peace between the United States and Russia.
If what's happening today in Alaska will get us closer to peace, that's what we want. That's what we want. And when the president of Russia got off his plane, I saw American reporters shouting hostile questions. It's almost like they don't want peace. They don't want peace. It's really awful.
Have a moment of reflection that I call a prayer. Pray for peace. And as my faith is Christian faith, So I would like to do the prayer in my faith tradition.
This is our city, our beloved New York. And we say finally it's time for peace in America. Our hard-earned tax dollars should no longer be going to a foreign Eastern European country that has chosen the path of destruction in needless war.
All these killings. How Jesus feels about all these endless wars. Jesus came to save the world, to bring the peace of God to the world. Who is that father or mother who has ever remained, who would ever be happy or remain indifferent as the children are engaged in bloody wars?
President Trump wouldn't have been able to even have this meeting if Tulsi Gabbard hadn't revealed that Russiagate was a complete hoax, that there was no Russian meddling in the 2016 election, that they made that up, not just to go after President Trump, but to stop peace, to put Trump in a position where he couldn't do what he's doing today and make peace and reconciliation with Russia.
We already think once again, those two presidents, President Donald Trump and President Vladimir Putin, for initiating that peace talk. Many people may not agree with them right now, but down the road, that result will manifest because killing will be stopped.
But President Trump and President Putin are discussing a tunnel connecting the United States to Russia over the Bering Sea. Think about all the jobs that would create. The Bering Sea tunnel, the Bering Strait tunnel. Thousands of Americans could be hired, thousands of Russians, and two countries that have been at odds with each other could be connected through the Bering Strait tunnel. It's a beautiful, beautiful vision.
Please support peace talks in Ukraine. Wow. And also bring for the peace together.
Yes, man.
I
do.
This city, I hope with God they do stop the war. Listen carefully. I know. And I like what you're doing.
Bible verse is from Matthew chapter 5, verse 9. It is said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." The true children of God stand up for peace, because peace comes from God, the Heavenly Father.
We want peace with Russia. We want peace with China. We want peace with Venezuela. We want peace with Iran. We want peace with any country in the world. We are for connecting the world with trade. The road to peace is development. When countries are trading with each other and doing business, they're not going to go to war with each other.
Think of the tourism and the spots in North Korea that we can visit. The beaches, the resorts, the casinos that they are open.
All right, we will get more of that later, but let's continue on the conversation. So you're out in the street and you were saying, I see the thank you, Tulsi. I certainly imagine that is for releasing various things on Russiagate. And you know, here's the thing about it. That is an important issue. And I'll tell you why. I don't have to tell you, but I'm going to say this to our people. One of the things that the Russiagate intelligence operation is what it was it created a background wherein the American people would reject any overtures towards Russia for peace. We were told they are invading our country technologically. They're trying to usurp our democracy. They're bad, they're evil, they're wrong, they're doing terrible things. So if Donald Trump or any other president said, I want peace, I want whatever, they had already created a background with Russiagate. And I think it was critical before they had this meeting. It was critical that they kind of lay waste to Russiagate so they can eliminate that background.
Indeed. And let's be clear. One difference I have with Fox News is the Fox News crowd is saying, well, this was just a plot against Trump. They're missing that this was a plot against Russia. This was a plot against world peace, that Trump was unable to reconcile and repair things with Russia after the Euromaidan coup that came from Obama, because he came into office being accused of being Putin's puppet, being accused of colluding with Russia, so to speak. Now, what's interesting is it was recently pointed out to me that the word collusion, there's no such crime. In the United States, there's a crime called conspiracy. But they have created such a hysteria around conspiracy theories. They decided not to call it that because people would immediately think, oh, well, that's a conspiracy theory. It's not true. So they discovered a new word, collusion, even though there's no such crime, but nothing took place. And they did an assessment. Tulsi showed it. They did an assessment before the election. Is Russia trying to help one candidate or the other? No, they're not. They did an assessment after the election. Is Russia trying to help one candidate or another? No, they're not. And Obama said, ooh, I'm looking for another answer. Can you give me another answer? And the whole idea of saying that Trump was working with Russia, that Russia was trying to rig things for Trump, it came from a Hillary Clinton campaign office. It did not come from the intelligence community. And they highlighted stuff that they knew was bunk, like the Steele dossier, and they kept it going, and millions of our tax dollars was spent. And all of this was to cast a shadow so that Trump couldn't reconcile things, so that things would escalate to the point that they are now, where there's a war going on, right? That Russiagate was an essential part of paving the way for a war. I mean, this is just like weapons of mass destruction. There were no weapons of mass destruction. They lied about that and paved the way for the U.S. invasion of Iraq. In this case, they lied to say Russia had colluded or interfered in the U.S. elections in order to psych the American people up, to prevent anything, to de-escalate the Ukraine situation. And they lied to get us into a war. This is exactly what Bush did. And it was done by Obama. It was done by Hillary Clinton. It was done by the intelligence agencies cooperating with the Democratic Party. And the response of the mainstream, like liberal media, Fox has talked about it. Tulsi Gabbard has talked about it. Is they've just said, oh, there's nothing there. They don't have an answer. There's no debunking it. The files are there. Tulsi revealed the files. You read them, and there's more of them coming out every day. James Clapper said it was a team sport. Making this up was a team sport. I mean, it is so blatant what they did. And that all the Russia collusion, all of that is based on a lie. I will say that some of the people that didn't agree with us out in the street, they still think it's true. And I said, didn't you get the memo?
Yeah. Well, here's the problem with Russiagate. And I said this when it happened. I had my show on Pacifica in Washington, D.C. And, how can you imagine a guy on Pacifica back then saying this is a load of bunk in Washington, D.C., the land of blue and yellow flags, right? So it wasn't easy, but I could the whole time said it makes no sense. It's a lie, and I don't accept it. And the thing that I found, and I made this statement back then, I came to realize someone would call in and say, oh, what about the Trump Tower meeting? And I'd say, I'm pretty familiar with it. In fact, the Russian lawyer was a woman named Natalia Veselnitskaya. I interviewed her with a interpreter. I'm very familiar with that. What do you know about that? But I'm all open. Tell me, explain to me how the Trump Tower meeting shows collusion. The caller would say, well, what about? And they go to something. I go, wait a minute. Let's start with that. I'm all ears. What I found was this, Caleb, they knew nothing. That they didn't believe that based on evidence. They believed it as an act of faith, almost as a ritual. I am a Democrat. I hate Donald Trump. Therefore, anything that I am told about Donald Trump is a werewolf. He's a vampire. He's a zombie. It must be true. He's terrible. I hate him. And I was told something bad about him. It must be true. I realized they created it. They took advantage of something. They said, you don't like Donald Trump. Well, there's a lot of reasons a person can come up with not to like Donald Trump. So they come up with something. You don't like Donald Trump. Yes. Therefore, now we have the power of suggestion. Anything that I suggest to you, you're going to believe, and you're going to repeat the talking points. You're going to know the music, but you don't know the words. Yes, it's the Trump Tower meeting. Tell me about it. Huh? Because in their circles, nobody ever said, give me the details on the Trump Tower meeting. They just said, yeah, the Trump Tower meeting. Yeah, the Trump Tower meeting. Yeah. Nobody knew what the heck they even meant when they said that, but they watched Rachel Maddow. And so we ended up with this fake, false thing where, was it Voltaire who said any belief that is not founded in logic and reason will not be swayed by it? That's where we end up. And of course, as you said, ultimately, it's to stop this. And this, to me, this is not about Donald Trump, whether you like him or not, whether he's smart or not, whether he's good or bad or whatever. It's about Nixon. A lot of the issues with Nixon, but Nixon went to China, and that was a good thing. It's not who it is, but it's that these are two nuclear superpowers, and we need to start opening the potential for peace.
I've talked a lot about false polarization, and woke versus MAGA is a false polarization. Anywhere you go in America, people know about three things that they are very positive about. One, all these wars being waged around the world, they're not benefiting us. They're not for us. They're for somebody else. They're for, some rich people. They're for, the government, the deep state, whatever. It's not for us. Two, our living standard is going down. Our life expectancy is dropping. Our roads are falling apart. Our water's not being purified. Three, our freedoms are being taken away. Our right to freedom of speech, our right to privacy is slipping away. Wherever you go, red state, blue state, rural, urban, secular, conservative, religious, whatever, people agree on that. And the MAGA team sports, MAGA versus woke, red team versus blue team, that is a way to make sure that we never unite around those issues against the very, very rich people that are taking us in that direction. The ship is going in one direction that is leading us off a cliff, and everyone can see that. And instead of getting together and getting hold of the wheel and turning the ship around, which is what we need to do, we're too busy fighting over, are you on the red team or on the blue team? And the team sports is the death of us, because, somebody can be awful. Somebody can be a horrible, horrible person and still say true things. Hitler was a horrible mass murdering person, but, if he said the sky was blue, the sky was still blue, whether he was a good guy or not. Right. And that reality, facts, and logic. Look, my organization, we're the Center for Political Innovation. We're not on the red team or the blue team. And when we were rallying in Chicago, we had a banner of Trump and Kim shaking hands, only peace can make America great again. We had a banner supporting Ibrahim Traore, the African leader. And many times people would walk by and they're like, I can't figure out what side they're on. Now, today, people thought we were on the MAGA team because we were supporting something Trump did. We were thanking Tulsi. But a lot of times when we're out there on the street doing our outreach, people don't know what team we're on. And a lot of times, if you really ask people to just listen to what we say, they agree with us. They agree. We need peace around the world. We need to protect our freedoms. We need a government that invests in communities and builds people up and does something about the fact that our country is falling apart internally and living standards are dropping. We need jobs and schools and education. We need paved roads. We need power plants. We don't need prisons. We don't need wars. And we certainly need to protect our freedom to protest, our freedom to disagree with the government, our freedom to not be spied on without a warrant. All of these things are important, and Americans agree about these things. And the false polarization is the way they're keeping us from seeing, getting together and saying, look, this is what we agree on. And that is what we've got to push back against, the false polarization. I will work with anyone to do good. I will work with nobody to do evil. And if you can live by that rule, great.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. And I think that what we're looking at now is a very dangerous people. First of all, people have to understand the dangerous circumstance that we're in. I mean, we're in a position where the United States has literally, the neocons, the U.S. empire, started a proxy war against the only country in the world that has more nukes than we do. And we are seeing the lines crumble in Ukraine, which was inevitable. And we're coming to a point where the U.S. empire is going to have to look at its proxy war and realize that it's not just lost. It has collapsed. It is catastrophically lost. And that's coming up. And that's a dangerous situation, because the neocons are going to say, we've got to act. We've got to do this. We got to throw nukes. We got to all die. And we're trying to argue for the kind of dialogue that can prevent that. I think that's what I'm saying anyway, Caleb.
Yeah. And I mean, there are certain facts that need to be acknowledged here. The one thing that needs to be pointed out is Russia won. They won the war. It's just a question of how much they won the war. I mean, at this point, they have completely demolished Ukraine. Ukraine doesn't stand a chance. The question is, are they going to march all the way in, and do they have to take Kiev, and do there have to be more and more bodies, piling up before we finally call it off? Or can we call it off now? I thought it was interesting. We didn't hear the terms of what the deal was. I have heard different theories floating around, but I guess at the end of the day, I mean, Zelensky is the guy who will have to sign it, right? Trump said at the next meeting, Zelensky will be there. But I've heard many people say they picked Alaska because how did the United States acquire Alaska from Russia? They bought it. and that there's been over $350 billion of Russian money stolen since the conflict began. And that money is sitting in bank accounts frozen. And one thing that is floating around, again, can't confirm it, is that basically the USA will unfreeze that money, and Russia will use that money to buy the Donbass from Ukraine. And that'll be the way this ends. Russia basically considers that money gone anyway, because they've already made up the difference with the oil prices and such. So at this point, that money's gone. So if that money that was theirs before that they're not going to get back, then gets given to Ukraine, and that's the deal. And a new border is drawn, and the Donbass are considered part of the Russian Federation. Ukraine recognizes that. The United States and the whole world recognizes that. Then we can move on, and through rebuilding, we can establish peace. And that's very important, right? That if Ukraine starts rebuilding and economically developing, Russia's right there. It's their trading partner. And if Russia is involved in the process of helping Ukraine rebuild, I thought it was really great. Putin said that, as hard as it is to believe, they consider the Ukrainian people to be brothers, to be a brother people, right? That they have the same origins, and that, look, I've been in Russia. I was in Moscow, and I saw in the Moscow subways, they have a beautiful mural that's got traditional Ukrainian dancers on it, celebrating the victory in World War II. And it's got like Soviet soldiers coming back from war and traditional Ukrainian dancers and their traditional outfit. And, when I've been going to Russia for years, there used to be right near Red Square, there was this nice traditional Ukrainian restaurant right near Red Square. And they would always take you there because that was, Ukrainian food was always really loved by people in Russia. They don't consider the Ukrainians to be their blood enemies. They're not trying to abolish Ukrainian culture. And, people get really fired up. But let's talk about this. The only reason that Ukraine as a country exists is because of the Soviet Union. Right. And no one wants to talk about this and all of that. But in the Russian Empire, there was no border separating Ukraine from the rest of the Russian Empire. It was just a region of the Russian Empire where they spoke a little bit of a different dialect. And when Lenin came to power, he was really into the right of nations to self-determination. And he said, people in this region, Ukrainians, you have your own dialect, you have your own region, you're a nation. And Lenin drew the first border of where Ukraine was. And Lenin then commissioned the communist government in Ukraine that was part of the Soviet Union to sit down and make a written Ukrainian language. So if it wasn't for the Soviet Union, there would never have been a border for Ukraine. There would never have been a written Ukrainian language. It was all just the Russian Empire until then. So the entire notion of a Ukrainian nation comes from something the Ukrainian nationalists all hate, which is the Soviet Union. And then Stalin expanded the border of Ukraine, and then Khrushchev added Crimea to Ukraine. And that's why when this war began, you'll remember Putin said, they talk about decommunization, right? They're trying to get rid of communism in Ukraine. It's like, you really want to decommunize? Without the communists, there would be no Ukraine. And no one wants to point that out, right? There's this narrative that, the Soviet Union was just so determined to destroy everything Ukrainian. No, the Soviet Union went out of its way to create everything Ukrainian. Even up to this day, most of the people in what was considered Ukraine before the war began speak Russian in their households. But the Soviet government required that the written Ukrainian language and the spoken Ukrainian language be taught in schools to all children in order to promote it. This narrative about cultural genocide and all this, that's just not the reality. And let me add also that, there was a horrendous famine in Ukraine in the early 30s. No one disputes that. But that famine wasn't just in Ukraine. It was in Moldova. It was in Russia. It was all over the country as they were trying to get their agricultural system together. And the regions that were the hardest hit by that famine are the regions that actually have joined with Russia, are the new republics. So, where there's, support for Russia. So this idea that there was some, Russian plot to exterminate Ukrainians or something, that just didn't happen. That's something that we're taught in school. It's a narrative that began with Hitler. It was Hitler who originated that narrative to recruit, Ukrainians to fight against the Soviet Union. And it got inserted into, anti-communist propaganda in Western countries. And then after World War II, it was an anti-Soviet talking point, and we've just kind of accepted it. And a lot of historians look into this and they say that's just not what happened. You can criticize the Soviet Union for violating human rights. You can criticize all kinds of things. But, Stalin built the world's largest power plant at the time, the Dnieper Dam in Ukraine, right? Stalin electrified Ukraine. Stalin wiped out illiteracy in Ukraine. this idea that Ukraine has been, suffering at the hands of Russia for generations on end, that's not true.
Well, and let me just say this: we're speculating. Somebody's like, a couple of people were like, "Well, no, Caleb's making stuff up. Russia didn't. They're not going to buy." People are speculating right now. We don't have any final. When people talk in alternative media, we often speculate. So if we speculate and say maybe it's this or maybe it's that, don't go run off. Caleb said this, Garland said that. They're wrong. We're speculating. We're trying to figure this thing out. Nothing's come out. We know that according to President Putin, it sounds like some kind of a deal was made. According to Trump, it sounds like he's saying, well, we didn't get this done. In other words, they didn't get. Sounds like some kind of offer. We're speculating. We don't know what it was. Maybe we'll know tomorrow. It sounds to me like until Trump calls the lunatics in Europe, that he won't know. We already know the position they're going to take, but it sounds like some offer is going. We're speculating about the offer, so let's not get carried away in the chat, okay? We're speculating. We're having a conversation here, trying to figure this thing out the same as you are. Okay. Yeah, I'm with you. I think that the other thing is the fact that the Russians came. They were extremely professional. They came and they weren't a bunch of evil demons with flaming swords attacking and the vicious Russian hordes. That they were guys in business suits who were professional coming to, and they were having a press conference. And we've had this craziness built up from Hollywood. If you ever notice, in Hollywood, Russia is always the Russian mafia. And like you watch something, I don't know how many movies, and when you get to the mafia, the Russian mafia, and there's like some guy and he's all sweaty and he needs a shave and he talks like, West, we must get the money, but first we will kill you and your son. He's saying stuff like that, right? So we got Hollywood giving us this caricature of Russians. We got the Democrats and neocons, whoever, giving us this caricature. What we're getting is caricatures of some evil group of whatever, right? And then what we have is real people coming, having a professional meeting, a diplomatic meeting. I think it's positive. And I think it gives those of us who are A, pushing peace, and B, arguing, don't believe the propaganda about the Russians. I think it gives us something or helps us and gives us something to work with also.
Yeah, well, I mean, the day wasn't without some snafus. Now, I know I've seen that a lot of the Russian journalists are very mad about the conditions, that they were not, in a good place. They were like put up in like an army barracks or something like that. And, and that I guess it was really hard to get hotel space because this is the height of tourist season in Alaska. And this was not anticipated. This was very last minute. And then also, I think it's certainly not an accident that the foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, wore his Soviet Union T-shirt.
That was great, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was great. So, it's
what do you think that was about? Just again, hey, everybody in the chat, don't get carried away. We are speculating. We do that sometimes. It's kind of fun. Okay. So Garland and they said he did it because he was a commie. I don't know. But what are your thoughts on that? I found as soon as I thought, I think I'm going to try to pick it. That was interesting. That he brought the legacy of the Soviet Union with him.
Right. And then also after the meeting, Russian President Putin went and laid flowers on the graves of all the Soviet pilots who gave their lives fighting Japan in Alaska, right? And we don't know about that, but there were Soviet fighters on planes in Alaska who went and fought Japan. And Victory Over Japan Day is coming up, right? And Xi Jinping wants Trump there. Putin invited Trump to the Victory in Europe Day celebration, the Victory Day celebration that happened back in May. And he wasn't able to go, but now Tulsi Gabbard has released all this information. And I think now Trump can go. I think he should go to Xi Jinping's Victory Over Japan celebration. I think that would be a really great thing if he did that. And Putin will be there. Kim Jong-un, somebody else he likes, will be there. It'll be great. And Kim Jong-un was just in Russia, I believe. They were commemorating the liberation of the northern half of the Korean Peninsula by Soviet troops. And Xi Jinping is going to have the big celebration for the victory over Japan. And China is driving out of the victory of what they call, I think, the anti-Japanese war of resistance is what they call it. So this is an important moment. And, the other thing is that they said they weren't only talking about Ukraine. That was the other thing. They said that they were talking about economics, etc. The Bering Sea Tunnel, the Bering Sea Bridge, the Bering Sea Tunnel, that's been in the works for a long time. There's been a lot of talk of that for a long time. And I have a feeling that was on the agenda. And it's a weird pattern with the Trump administration that, I've talked a lot about the division among the American elite, the Yankee and cowboy war, the New England old money, the Rockefellers versus the military industrial complex, the fracking cowboys, the Texas billionaires, the California nouveau riche, all that, right? That's an old time divide in American politics. Carl Oglesby wrote his book about the Kennedy assassination, the impeachment of Nixon, the Yankee and cowboy war. Well, it's interesting that Trump has raised this idea of Canada joining the United States, right? And in the western parts of Canada, right, where you had the trucker convoys, I think Alberta is about to have a referendum about joining the United States. Alaska obviously is not connected to the rest of the United States. You got a bunch of Canada in between. But the Arctic is really, really important. And the Arctic was definitely on the agenda. The Arctic is full of natural gas and it's full of minerals. And Western Canada is also full of natural gas and full of minerals. And Alaska is already the United States and it's up there. And I think developing that region and maybe trying to figure out a way they could have a corridor connecting Alaska to the continental United States and then a Bering Sea bridge connecting Alaska to Russia. I feel like that is that Western faction, the cowboys, if you will, that are not in with the New England, London Yankee establishment. I think they want to pivot the centers of economic power in the United States to the West. And doing that is developing Alaska, increasing the amount of wealth in Alaska, and the Bering Sea bridge, the Bering Strait tunnel connecting to Russia. I think that that's part of this, and that divide among the American elite, where the more conservative forces are the cowboys that are located in the West, and the more liberal forces are the New England old money, the New York Council on Foreign Relations, the Rockefellers, etc. I think you can read this into that. And the whole idea of annexing parts of Canada, the trucker convoy thing, the Bering Sea, the meeting taking place in Alaska, I think you can put it, in that category. Again, like you said before, we're kind of trying to read the shadows here. This is not, they didn't tell us and we don't really know. But the meeting went forward. I do remember that when, they had the Kim Jong-un, the last Trump Kim Jong-un meeting before the talks ended, it was immediately over. It was just, they got there was nothing to agree on. It was over. And Trump said, I'll know within the first 2 minutes if this is going to be productive. And it went on for a lot longer than the first 2 minutes. And they did meet and they did have progress. So I think that today is going to lead to some good things. I really do. Now it's being, the Russian security services has said that the NATO countries had a meeting and they picked Zelensky's replacement already. He's out. He's done. Right. They've picked his replacement. And that when, he outlawed that anti-corruption organization, and then they had protests all over the country, which how are you doing that in a country that's, in a war? You're allowed to have all these protests. They've outlawed all the other political parties, but then they have all these protests. Clearly somebody in the Ukrainian government wanted those protests to happen. There's big calls for Zelensky to go. And that Zelensky, he needs to play his cards pretty well, because there's a good chance he's going to be the fall guy. We know, you and I know, and people who watch these programs know, this war is going to go down in history as one of the biggest money laundering operations in history, right? They have pilfered so much money. Remember at the beginning of the war when everyone had Ukraine flags out and they were telling us all to give every last nickel to Ukraine, and people thought they were helping hungry children. They were actually helping Ukrainian oligarchs, buy yachts and buy luxury apartments in European cities. And, they're going to have to blame somebody for that. And it looks like Zelensky is going to be the guy.
Do you remember when either ABC or CBS, one of them, did this story, and it was 70% of the money that was going to Ukraine was being stolen, and within like 2 days they made them take it down? Do you remember that?
I do.
So they did, yes. They just made him take it down. They didn't say, oh no, they just like pretended like it didn't happen because the story came out. It's like 70% of the, and people were like, what? 70% of the money gone. That story was gone, was quickly done away with.
Yeah, and they rated Ukraine as one of the most corrupt countries in the world. The New York Times and others did. It was just understood Ukraine was a wildly corrupt country, and they scrubbed those records. They went and revised the websites to not say that. I mean, it was just particularly ridiculous. And, you know, when this is all said and done, the facts are going to be there and somebody's going to be held liable. And Zelensky, he needs to figure out how he can tap dance his way out of office and not in handcuffs. You know, that's what he really needs to figure out, because they're going to want to blame somebody. I don't think Zelensky is the guy who's personally responsible. I think he was the front man, right? He was the actor. He was a paid actor, basically. However, they're going to try to make somebody the fall guy, and it's a good chance it's going to be him.
He knows too much, pal. He knows way too much for his own good. I'll put it that way, in my opinion. He knows too much for his own good. The safest place for him might be Moscow. He should be calling the FSB trying to make a deal, because that may be the only way he gets out with his hide. But at any rate, you know, one thing that's obvious right now, and that is that I saw where Gregory Meeks was preaching, and here's what kills me. The neocons here are so intellectually bankrupt, just like the European neocons. Meeks was praying, preaching something about, yes, Trump didn't get a deal with Ukraine. Now he knows he needs to do back-breaking, bone-crushing sanctions. But the sanctions are not on them, they're on us. If he listens to these people, if Trump would listen to these people and say, okay, we're going to do 100% sanctions on China. We went through that last March. We know how that ends. It ends with empty shelves. It ends with no rare earths for Detroit or anywhere else that's building anything. It ends with a collapsed economy. So these people are so unrealistic, as bad as they're telling us Trump is. And I'm, like I said, I'm not saying Trump is the second coming of the by any stretch of the imagination, but he's the president now. It is what it is. You got to face the reality of that. Sadly to say, Trump's more grounded in reality. And I don't know how much grounded he is in reality, but he's far more grounded in reality. He's somewhat grounded in reality. These people are like, yes, let's do this. And you're like, but that will collapse our economy. It's almost like they're like, I'm going to say this because A, I know it's not going to happen. And B, I'm not really going to think about what would happen. I'm just going to say it needs to be done. It's insanity.
Well, it's interesting because, you know, we talk about the neocons. Brzezinski was not a neocon. A lot of people tell you Brzezinski was a neocon. He wasn't. And when Bush made his axis of evil speech after 9/11, Zbigniew Brzezinski didn't agree with it. And his difference with the neocons was Brzezinski hated the Russians. He absolutely hated the Russians. He was Polish. He'd been raised to hate Russians or whatever. But his game was, okay, we're going to find the Taliban and we're going to make them allies against the Russians. We're going to find Eastern European far-right people and we're going to make alliances and we're going to suck up to China and turn them against. He wanted to play games. Whereas the neocons, with them, it was a moralistic thing, right? They're on a crusade to spread freedom, right? You know, they viewed the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany as equivalent, and both of them as examples of excessive democracy, which, how does that make sense? But it was basically, it's when the rabble get together and threaten the great intellectuals, you get, you know, authoritarian regimes. And so it's the duty of the United States to protect the freedom of intellectuals around the world by overthrowing these governments, creating societies where the best and brightest can rise to the top. That's what Leo Strauss and Irving Kristol believed. If you read their writings on being neocons, they were on a moral and ethical crusade. Whereas Brzezinski was saying, look, I'll align with anybody. It's a chessboard. He wrote the grand chessboard. What's interesting is the liberals are now the neocons and Trump is Brzezinski. Trump is saying, let's make a deal and let's figure out what we need to do, right? Now, he doesn't hate the Russians, but he's at least thinking strategically, right? And the liberals are just like, no, Putin bad. Even if we have to wreck our own economy, it's our moral imperative to oppose, you know, and it's like the liberals are the neocons now, you know, that are on a crusade. And Trump is trying to be strategic and he's trying to think. And really what it's about, and Scott Ritter has put this really, really well in the interviews he's been doing over there, is that Russia already has won the war, right? They're figuring out the terms of defeat. I will say I do not I do not envy Donald Trump because he's going to have to, when this war ends, he's going to have to frame it in a way as if he won. And he's good at doing that. He says, oh, I got him. He's going to have to do that really hard because it won't match reality. Russia won this war. Russia won this war. Ukraine, it's over. They don't have a chance, and they have to negotiate an end. And Trump is going to have to frame this as some kind of epic victory where he stood up to Putin or something like that. And that's what Trump has to do for American politics, but that's not the reality. Russia won. Russia won overwhelmingly.
Yeah. And so what we're dealing with now is, Caleb and I are anti-imperialist people, and we're opposed to empire. No question about it. We push back against empire. We stand against empire. That being said, you have to be realistic about, I'll put it like this. You got to be alive today to be anti-imperialist. You know what I mean? You can't pretend that there are not real consequences today. If you're like, okay, we're here, when does the revolution start? Great, when does the revolution start? But you got to be alive to have a revolution. So when we see, for instance, the Kamala Harris, no Trump fan. If you ask Garland, hey, it's Kamala Harris or Trump, I'd have to take Trump. I mean, that's a reality. Not that I want either one of them. Who do I want? I voted for the ghost of Hugo Chavez. That's who I voted for. But my point being, here's a reality. We're in a situation, a critical situation, where this thing could go nuclear. And I think we have to push and say, in the long run, we're pushing for a system that gives everyone the opportunity and that looks out for the masses. In the short run, we got to hold this thing together enough to get to that system. People want to pretend like you have to just ignore that. Who cares? Trump, they're all the same. Well, they're a lot the same, but they're not exactly the same. And a little bit difference could be enough. And again, Trump, look, even now they're doing that thing in Azerbaijan, which I don't think, to be quite frank, I don't think they'll get it through the Armenian parliament. They may. So they're, harassing the back of us. So they're doing all kinds of diabolical deeds that we obviously oppose. But in the short run, we have to do what we can to try to keep things as peaceful as possible so that the situation is manageable. You know what I mean? You have to manage the situation that you have in order to work towards the situation that you want.
Yeah. Well, I wrote this book a couple of years ago. It's now available in Chinese. It's hitting the Chinese market. Where is America going? Marxism, MAGA, and the Coming Revolution. In that book, I lay out, which is basically my thesis on all of this, which is that there are two economies in the world. There is the Wall Street, London, globalist, imperialist economy, right?
Finance capital.
Yeah. And that system is failing and crashing. There's a new economy in the world that came into existence as the result of anti-colonial, anti-imperialist revolutions. Russia, China wouldn't be what they are if they hadn't had a communist revolution, if they hadn't seized control of their own economy and built themselves up. The Bolivarian countries of Latin America, the Islamic Revolution of Iran, the West African Union of Sahel states, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger. They're a new economy that's in the world, the Belt and Road Initiative and all of that. And these two economies are in the world, and the leaders of the, finance capital, globalist, imperialist economy, their solution is to just declare all-out war against the alternative economy in the world. They've just got to crush it. And in order to carry that out, they've got to set up a low-wage police state here at home. And basically, those of us with the understanding that the only future our country is going to have is with the new economy, that old economy, that old imperialist way of doing things is doomed. Our understanding has to be that we need to get our Western United States and other Western countries as tied in with the new economy as we possibly can, right? We need there to be trade and connection with China, with Russia. We need that Bering Sea tunnel to be constructed. We need those sanctions to be lifted. And we need there to be joint ventures, et cetera. And that can lead to the development of an axis within American politics that wants the United States to be restructured to be part of that new economy. And that's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's going to be a gradual process. And it's going to take time. And that, you know, part of it is just that this new economy is not going away. You know, that they thought after the fall of the Soviet Union it was done. That's clearly not the case. It's getting stronger. I've been hearing that China is about to collapse my whole life. Hasn't happened yet. You know, and that it's going to take time. But eventually there's going to be wealthy people who realize that the new economy is the way to go. There's going to be small business owners. There's going to be a lot of working class people, and that some kind of anti-monopoly coalition is going to emerge eventually. But key to setting it up is connecting us with the new economy rising around the world and emphasizing the importance of economic growth, because the mechanisms that the old order are using to stabilize the economy are Malthusian. They think growth is bad. They think degrowth is the answer. Smaller is better, reduce the population. That's what they believe. They've believed that since the 1800s. You know, they've believed that for a long time. That the only way to save their system is to reduce the population. There's too many people in the world and there's too much economic growth. And we have to push back and say, no, growth is good. Human beings are great. Human beings are the source of all wealth. It's human labor power that creates the wealth of this world, and connect ourselves with the rising economy. And gradually, as a result of conditions and the balance of forces changing, there will be a movement in this country to get us there. Trump is the very, 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 very beginning of this, in that Trump represents, to some degree, not completely, a layer of wealthy people that are just selfish. They don't care about the overall interest of imperialism. They just want to make money. And they're not part of the club. They're not elite in with the New England establishment, and they just want to make money. And so because of that, they'll make a deal with Russia. They'll make a deal with China. They'll make a deal with Venezuela or Iran if it makes them money. Now, not all of Trump's people think that way necessarily, but a lot of them do. And that, if they are able to do that, more and more of the seeds of the new economy can be planted in the United States, and that will blossom, and that will lead to another thing, and things will get into motion. But if we cut ourselves off, and if we just continue to just isolate and attack and lock down further as a country, we're not getting any closer to what needs to happen. And that is the reality. I was on a great Zoom call with Jesse Neville of the Uhuru 3 yesterday. They are about to launch a campaign to repeal the Foreign Agents Registration Act, which I think is a tremendous thing to do. And I think it has a great opportunity. I think it'll pass because that law is being used by the rich against each other. It's not just being used against revolutionaries like the Uhuru movement, great activists like Scott Ritter. They're also using it against, Biden. They used it against the Trump administration. They're using it on each other so much. And that creates an opening for people that are rich and powerful to say, well, gee, I don't want the other team to be able to throw me in jail. Eric Adams was accused of being a foreign agent of Turkey, right? And if they say, look, we don't want it to be used against us, we could see that law gotten rid of. That law has absolutely no constitutional basis. It's so vaguely written, it's not clear what acting as a foreign agent even is. And it could be used to go after anybody. You go after Walmart. Walmart has stores in Brazil. So if Walmart's lobbyists talk to Congress and say, gee, I don't think you should put sanctions on Brazil because we got a business there. Oh, foreign agent, Walmart didn't register, drag them all to jail. They're not going to do that. And I will say some of the debate around the FARA law that we're hearing lately is misguided. I see on the right, Nick Fuentes has debated some other people about FARA. They seem to argue on the premise, well, FARA is good. We just need Israel to register under it. No, FARA is not good. It is unconstitutional. It is completely unconstitutional. And we've seen that it can be weaponized to say that free speech is acting as a foreign agent, and it can criminalize being a peace activist or advocating trade with other countries. We need to get rid of the FARA law. It needs to be gotten rid of. And one thing I suggested on the call is I said what we ought to do is we ought to go around to everyone who's been charged under this law and get them to sign on to it. Get an ad in the New York Times or something like that. And it's time to just get rid of the FARA law once and for all. And that will be a step toward, like I said, getting us more connected with the new economy, building up the axis here in America that will understand the kind of government we need, that'll fight for working families and invest in communities. And that there are a lot of different things that we can do. I'm also really all about opposing political violence. I think political violence is one way, especially with this false polarization. That's one way to just make sure that the ruling elite get what they want, because people will be all afraid of getting shot and instability.
And then start calling people terrorists. See, that's look what they're doing in England, that they'll do the same thing here. If somebody gets shot and they take one and they say, okay, everybody who supports whatever that person supported is now a terrorist. They understand violence. I just want to update people. Apparently, President Trump has done an interview on Fox News, and it said, let's see, the president was pleased by Putin's words that the Ukrainian crisis wouldn't have happened if he hadn't been president. Well, we know they were, buttering Trump up. They were rubbing some butter on Trump. Everybody knows that. Trump stated the agreement on Ukraine now depends on Zelensky. Well, we know what he's going to say, but if they quote agreement on Ukraine, it sounds as like that the Russians made some kind of an offer. Now, we
And welcome to Hannity. And tonight we are back at Joint Base Elmendorf, Richardson, and we are in beautiful Anchorage, Alaska, and the historic summit between President Donald Trump and President from Russia, Vladimir Putin, is now in the books, but not before Vladimir got an up-close look at the power, the sophistication, the strength, the might of the U.S. military with this incredible, perfectly timed flyover featuring a B-2 stealth bomber and 4 F-35 stealth fighters. Now, following that epic show of force, both leaders met for roughly 3 hours. What happened? How did the meeting go? And what's next for Russia and Ukraine? Joining us now for his very first post-summit interview, the president of our great country. Sir, how are you?
Thank you very much.
We're glad you could be here.
Thank you.
So you said before the interview, you said, in 2 minutes, I will know. I watched very closely when you met him on the red carpet after both your planes landed. What vibe did you get in 2 minutes?
Well, I always had a great relationship with President Putin, and we would have done great things together in terms of, their land is incredible. The rare earth, the oil, gas, everything, it's incredible. It's the largest piece of land in the world as a nation by far. I think they have 11 time zones, if you can believe it. That's big stuff. But we would have done a lot of great things, but we had the Russia hoax, which stopped us from doing that. We would have done so great, but we had one of the great hoaxes. I mean, there were others like the election itself, as you know, as you covered better than anyone, but it was a rigged election and a horrible thing that took place in 2020. But we would have had a great relationship, but we did amazingly well considering, he would look and see what happened. He would think we're crazy, with the made up Russia hoax. So, we had something very important, and we had a very good meeting today, but we'll see. I mean, it's, you have to get a deal. We agreed on a lot of points. I want to see people stop dying in Ukraine, and that's what's happening. We're losing 5, 6, 7,000. They're Russians, mostly Russians, and they're Ukrainian soldiers. There's some people dying in cities and towns where they're trying to blow up missile manufacturers and other things in some cities. I don't know if you know what's going on there, but there are a lot of people dying. And if we can end that war, it would be very good. And I was very happy to hear him say, if I was president, that war would have never happened.
Mr. President, that was my next question. He said at the joint press conference that and you have said this many, many times, and he confirmed for the world today, that if you were president, this wouldn't have happened. Did any of the specifics come up as to why he said that?
It did. It doesn't matter at this point, but that this war should never have happened. A lot of wars should never have happened. There was stupid things go down and the wrong people are talking, but Biden was a terrible president in so many ways. He should have never let it happen. And it did. There are millions of people killed. I mean, it's the worst thing since I see everyone saying worst since World War II by far. There's nothing even close. But we had a very good meeting today, and I think a lot of points were negotiated on behalf of Ukraine and on behalf of the whole NATO situation, where we're dealing very well with a lot of foreign countries that are great, European countries. Look, as far as I'm concerned, there's no deal until there's a deal. But we did make a lot of progress.
The meeting took place in this room.
Yeah.
This is where you met. Right in this room.
Well, let me examine it. Oh, there it is.
That's where you were sitting.
That's it. I would say that's it. Yep.
So did you have alone time with him?
Yeah, I did. I did actually after our speeches. He made a very good speech, and I also finished it up. And afterwards, we spoke. Right after that, we spoke very sincerely. I think he wants to see it done.
Yeah. In your press conference, you talked about a lot of things that you agreed on, and maybe one big issue you don't agree on. Are you prepared to go public with that?
No, I'd rather not. I guess somebody's going to go public with it. They'll figure it out. But no, I don't want to do that. I want to see if we can get it done. It's not a done deal at all. Mm-hmm. And Ukraine has to agree. I mean, President Zelensky has to agree. But it's a terrible war where he's losing a lot, and both of them are. And hopefully it can get completed. That'll be a great achievement for them. Forget about me, for them. And you'll save 7,000 lives a week. That's a lot.
I spoke very briefly to Secretary of State Rubio, and he did say to me, he goes, there's a difference when you're in the same room together than versus, talking to each other through the press.
Even through the phone?
Even through the phone.
It's not the same thing. When you're on a telephone, it's not the same thing either. This was, we were together almost 3 hours, and it was very extensive. And we agreed on a lot of points. A lot of points were agreed on. But there's not that much. There's, one or two pretty significant items, but I think they can be reached. Now it's really up to President Zelensky to get it done. And I would also say the European nations, they have to get involved a little bit. But it's up to President Zelensky. I think we are, and if they'd like, I'll be at that next meeting. They're going to set up a meeting now between President Zelensky and President Putin. And myself, I guess, I didn't ask you about it. Not that I want to be there, but I want to make sure it gets done. And we have a pretty good chance of getting it done.
If you had to grade it on a scale of 1 to 10?
So I think the meeting was a 10 in the sense that we got along great. And it's good when, two big powers get along, especially when they're nuclear powers. We're number one, they're number two in the world. And it's a big deal. That's a big deal. You never want to even mention that word, the word nuclear. But we have a tremendous nuclear. I rebuilt it when I was president, first term. And I hated to rebuild it. It was the one thing I hated to rebuild, but we had to. And we have the greatest nuclear force. We have the greatest military in the world, actually. And they have a big nuclear presence also.
Oh, you got to respect it. You
always have to respect it. You never want to use it. If you use that, it could be the end of the world. That's the kind of power we're talking about.
Let's talk about what brought President Putin to the table. I would argue that there are 4 things in my mind. If you think there are more or you don't think they were a factor, you did the trade deal with the European Union. And in that deal, you got nearly $1 trillion in commitments to purchase American oil. That's money that would otherwise be funding Putin's war machine. That's number one. India, 50% tariffs if they import Russian oil. You also, Vladimir Putin was moving at a speed you were comfortable with. So you said you would, unlike Biden, you wouldn't give weapons to Ukraine. You would sell weapons to Ukraine. The last thing, and I don't think it could be underestimated, is NATO is now paying twice what they were paying, and those countries that weren't paying their fair share are. Were those the 4 factors that brought him into this room today?
Well, NATO is now paying 5% as opposed to 2%, and they're paying it. And, look, it's headed by, as you know Mark very well. He's a great guy and great people. The leaders, I got to know them very well about 6 weeks ago. And great relationship with NATO, European nations, basically, but a great relationship. I don't want to say anything brought him to, he's a very smart guy. Nothing brought him to the table, so to speak. I think that he respects our country now. He didn't respect it under Biden, I can tell you that. He had no respect for it. I was so happy when he said this would have never happened. All those lives would be saved if they had a competent, if we had a competent president, those lives would have been saved. It's so sad. You know, I've negotiated 5 wars to their end. And wars that were tough. India,
I have
Pakistan.
7. India, Pakistan, Israel, Iran in 12 days, Rwanda, the Congo, Serbia, Kosovo, Cambodia, Thailand, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Egypt, Cambodia. You played a role in all of those, did you not?
I did. I didn't want to include the decimation of the nuclear arsenal, and because I don't consider it necessarily, you know, conclusive, but we did something amazing because for 22 years, no president was willing to do it. We decimated the nuclear capability, potential nuclear capability, which I think would have taken place within a month of Iran. And that was a big thing.
I have to go back. This is too historic and deep and profound. At a press conference, the president of Russia stated something that you had stated many, many times, and maybe people, your political opponents, might have dismissed. But he said, this war would not have taken place if you were president. Now, he did give you behind the scenes specific reasons why it happened under Biden. He did give you reasons.
Yeah, he did. But I know the reason. It's gross incompetence. I mean, we have a border that's totally closed now, and people come in, but they come in legally. But we had 0, as you know. The first time you heard it was 3 months ago, but we've done it now 3 times in a row. 0 people coming in illegally. We have many things that are going well now. Our economy is great. We don't have inflation. The price of energy is down. The price of groceries are down. The price of everything is down. People are happy. We're saving Social Security. You saw that the other day where we have a genius in charge. I took him out of J.P. Morgan Chase. He was the head of, one of the top people in there, and he did great. He went to one of the big funds. One of the top people. That they take a cut. I think he said he's working for 1% of what he was working for. These are unbelievable people. And the job he's done in Social Security and making it really powerful and strong is amazing. And we've done that with many things. I love doing it. I love seeing this country be great again. And Vladimir said just a little while ago, he said, I've never seen anybody do so much so fast. He said, your country is like hot as a pistol.
That's a lot.
And a year ago, he thought it was dead. Everybody thought it was dead.
Let me ask you this. We mentioned, to whatever degree history will judge your involvement in the 7 conflicts we mentioned, and this conflict in particular. However they will end up judging you, I don't think any other world leader would have been able to set up this meeting today. You're expending a lot of political capital. I've watched a lot of leaders. I've been doing this since 1987 when I started my radio career. It's a long time. And I've seen a lot of presidents come and go, a lot of world leaders come and go. And you're willing to expend political capital. All of the conflicts that I mentioned, including this one, this does not impact the United States as much as it does our allies in Europe.
It's true.
The Middle East, when we get involved in the Middle East, but you're doing it anyway. Now, why? Is it to save lives? Do you want a safer world?
Yeah, number one, to save lives in all cases, because wars are wars. When you see what would have happened with Cambodia as an example. Now, I'm not involved, but I was involved in negotiating a trade deal, and I said, you guys are going to be fighting Thailand, Cambodia, so many different. Look at India. Take a look at India and Pakistan. They were shooting down airplanes already, and that would have been maybe nuclear. I would have said it was going to go nuclear, and I was able to get it done.
That's a lot.
Number one is lives, and number 2 is everything else. Wars are very bad, and if you can avoid them, and I seem to have an ability to end them, to get people together. I use the power of the United States. We have got the greatest economy now in the world. We have trillions, not billions, trillions of dollars or millions. We have trillions of dollars pouring into our coffers. I'm getting calls from people in government saying, where did I get the $29 billion from? I said, why don't you try the tariff shelf? And, we have, as an example, the European nations, we made a great deal. They pay us literally trillions of dollars. Japan, so many. And you know what? They like us better. They respect us. They didn't respect us. They were paying us nothing. We were paying them. They weren't paying us. And I turned it around, and we're actually a very rich country now. I told you my favorite word is the word tariff.
35 trillion.
I actually made that a little bit later because I got criticized by the fake news. They said, what about religion? What about family?
Well, how many countries now have you made trade deals with, and how much is it incoming?
Many of them, and well, basically all of them, because I made, along with some great people, as you know them very well. They're on your show, but I made, I would say 12 or 13 of the big ones. In other words, we made the big deals, and the rest we just assign a tariff to. And we do that by gut instinct. We do that by how we're doing generally, how the relationship, and we do it also by deficits. If we're losing a lot of money with a country, you got to pay us a tariff. We got to make it even. We want to balance it out. And I was generous to a lot. Some of them, we lose so much money that, frankly, you'll never make it up. And if there are people that have been great to us as a country, then I take it a little bit easy. But for years, we've been a laughingstock all over the world, the way they took advantage of us. Now, in my first term, I did it, but we got hit with COVID. We had the greatest economy in the history of our country in my first term. But at the end of it, we got hit with a thing called COVID. You may have heard of it. And it decimated the world, the whole world. And we did a phenomenal job, Operation Warp Speed. A lot of people say it was one of the most incredible things they've ever seen. Operation Warp Speed, what we did a great job. But this was a tremendous problem for everybody. I mean, every country, even China, in all fairness, they got hit much later. People thought they avoided it. They got hit very hard. Everybody got hit. But we did a job like nobody's seen, and we came back, and we had a country that was respected again. And then we had this person get in there that had no right being president. He lost the election by a lot. His whole group was radical left, crazy people. And I'll tell you, our country was we were in a whole heap of trouble. And if that whole ideology didn't change, I think our country would have been dead. They say it. I was with also the king of Saudi Arabia, the head of Qatar, the head of UAE, about 3 months ago now already. The time flies. And they put up $5.1 trillion investment in our country. And we have about $17 trillion coming into our country. The numbers like we've never seen before. And by the way, this is after 6 months. This is this is after 6 months. We never had numbers like that after years. And our country is so hot, and we're building so many factories. The car companies that left, they're pouring back. The AI, which is a hot thing, we're leading China by a lot. We're leading everybody with AI. A lot of these geniuses that you read about, they really are geniuses. I hope they're right. They're spending $50 billion to build a plant and $90 billion. You think of $50 million for building a plant. No, they're building $50 billion, $90 billion. They're going to Arizona. They're going all over the country. Arizona is a hot spot, but they're going all over the country. And we're way ahead of everybody else. And, the biggest problem they had, they couldn't do the energy because the energy is massive. We need more electricity by twice that we have right now. In other words, as a country, we produce a lot of electricity. We need double that electricity at least to win the AI fight. Can you believe that one industry needs it? And so you can't just do that off the grid. The grid is old and it's fine, but it's old and tired and is subject to all sorts of problems. And I came up with an idea. I'm going to let you build your own electric plant. So we have these companies building these massive factories of intelligence, factories of genius, I call it. And they build their own electric plant with it. And I say, build them big. And we have a great person, Lee Zeldin, is approving them very quickly and environmentally friendly and all of that, but very, very quickly. And an amazing thing's happening. Wait till you see what happens when these things start to open.
Let me go back to this issue of Ukraine and Russia for a second. Most people, as they analyze this from the outside, this is how almost everybody's kind of universal thinking, how this ends. There's going to be some land swaps. There will be more Russian territory than there had been. And what Ukraine wants and needs desperately is our security measures that won't be NATO related. If you had to look into your crystal ball, is that how it ends?
Well, I think those are points that we negotiated, and those are points that we largely have agreed on, actually. I think we've agreed on a lot. And I can tell you, the meeting was a very warm meeting. You know, he's a strong guy. He's tough as hell and all of that. But the meeting was a very warm meeting between two very important countries, and it's very good when they get along. I think we're pretty close to a deal. Now, look, Ukraine has to agree to it. Maybe they'll say no, because Biden handed out money like it was candy, and Europe gave him a lot of money. You know, we gave him $350 billion. Europe gave them much less, but still a lot, $100 billion.
What would your advice, based on today, when you talk to Vladimir Zelensky, what's your advice to
make a deal?
Make the deal.
Got to make a deal, yeah. Look, Russia's a very big power, and they're not. They're great soldiers, and they have great, but, you know, they also had the best equipment. You know, they had our equipment. And I gave them javelins, if you remember, in my first term. In fact, there was a statement, I gave javelins. You remember the statement? I gave javelins, and Obama gave, because it was Obama at that time, Obama gave them sheets. And that's true. I gave javelins, and a lot of tanks were knocked out because of the javelins. The javelins, incredible weapon. It's a tank. You know, you look at this big, powerful tank, it ends up being a ball of metal lying on the ground and burning. I've never seen anything like it. We have the greatest military equipment in the world, but they did have courage in fighting. And, you know, they're fighting a big war machine. And we, I think, are close to a deal, but I don't like saying it. I always say, if I'm really close, I say 50-50, because so many things can happen. But I think President Putin would like to solve the problem, and it was a problem that should have never happened. This was a war. All of those families that lost somebody, and I have a book of thousands of people. They presented me with it today. Thousands of people, prisoners that will get released. We have more than 1,000 prisoners
that was agreed to today.
Well, they have to accept them. You know, they're going to release them. They have to accept them. I have a book of every. It's so sad to see. And then you have another book of people that are dead, and they have dead bodies all over, thousands of them that they want to switch between the two countries.
And you saw the pictures?
I saw pictures of the dead, yeah, of some of the dead, but I saw pictures of over 1,000 people that are prisoners, yeah, today.
Let me ask you.
That we can get back.
Okay, so you're cutting into Russia's main source of energy, a main source of income, which is energy. You make this deal with the European Union. You tell India, if you keep importing oil from Russia, we're going to put a 50% tax on you. The other big importer would be China. My understanding is you've had conversations with President Xi. Any conversations about Russia, Ukraine?
So Biden did something that was unthinkable. He drove, and Obama too. I stopped it, and then, you know, we had a tragedy happen, actually. It was a tragedy. The election was a tragedy. But he did something that was unthinkable. He drove China and Russia together. That's not good. If you are just a minor student of history, it's the one thing you didn't want to do, because they're basically natural enemies. Russia has tremendous amounts of land. China has tremendous amounts of people, and China needs Russia land. But because of pure stupidity, they were driven together. And you know what? That's what it is. I don't know that it's going to stay that way, because it really is. There's a natural friction there. But I think that today's meeting went really well, and I think we maybe will have a good result. But I just don't like to talk about it. That's why I agreed to do your interview, and I said, you know what, I'll do it, Sean. But that was like 2 days ago. I had no idea that. I said, Sean, are you going to ask me about what we
basically say on national TV? I regret saying yes to doing this.
Yeah, I shouldn't have done it, but that's okay.
You don't have to.
By the way, I have to say to the audience, this guy's a fantastic person. He's a great patriot. You love the country.
I love our country.
You are a very smart cookie. For anybody that ever questioned that, which I don't think there are too many, and just an outstanding man.
I love the fact that there's a possibility of peace everywhere. This is not insignificant. I agree with you. I don't like to see the dying. I don't think I want to see the books that you saw today.
I didn't like looking. I was very sad to watch and see.
When you talked before coming here about the consequences for Vladimir Putin being severe, I found that interesting. Severe would be defined by me. India doesn't buy your oil. The European Union won't buy it. And why in the back of my head was I thinking, wait a minute, Donald Trump just delayed a possible increase in tariffs on China. Why do I think that probably President Trump was thinking ahead that maybe if you had to, that would have been part of the consequences?
Well, because of what happened today, I think I don't have to think about that. Now, I may have to think about it in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or something, but we don't have to think about that right now. I think the meeting went very well.
All right. Do you ever think Hillary Clinton, the author of the bought and paid for Russian disinformation dossier, the author of the Russia hoax, going into today would be saying she would nominate you for a Nobel Peace Prize? I don't think you ever expected that happening.
Well, I don't want to be involved in that sense, not because of her. It's very nice. If she said that, it's very nice. I really appreciate it, too, actually. But
she tried to ruin your life, and in many ways, she ruined 3 years of your life.
Well, she made me stronger and tougher. And, we had...
You are way more forgiving than me.
Well, it was a sad chapter in our country's history. I will say that. Look, you can't run a country that way. Vladimir Putin said something, one of the most interesting things. He said, your election was rigged because you have mail-in voting. He said, mail-in voting, every election. He said, no country has mail-in voting. It's impossible to have mail-in voting and have honest elections. And he said that to me. It was very interesting because we talked about 2020. He said, you won that election by so much. And that's how he got it. He said, and if you would have won, we wouldn't have had a war. You'd have all these millions of people alive now instead of dead. And he said, and you lost it because of mail-in voting. It was a rigged election. But mail-in voting, Sean, the politicians, I think I'm going to make it a big, I know the answer is that Jimmy Carter, years ago, along with Scoop Jackson and some others, they had a committee, respected people, good committee, Jimmy Carter, good guy. He's a good man. And the conclusion was you can't have mail-in voting. We have mail-in voting. It's so dishonest. They send stuff. Some people get 7 ballots. Look at California with that horrible governor they have. He's one of the worst governors in history. He's incompetent. He doesn't know what he's doing. They send out like 38 million ballots. Some people get 5, 6, 7. But Vladimir Putin, smart guy, said you can't have an honest election with mail-in voting. And he said there's not a country in the world that uses it now.
Oh, I would love to see election reform.
We have to do it. I don't know why we're not doing it.
No,
you bring it up. The Democrats don't want it. Look, the Republicans want it, but not strongly enough. I mean, they got to want it strong because it can't be honest. It goes through a postman. It goes through somebody else. When you go to a really well-run voting booth, you go in, you have to hand a card, a picture, or this or that. You don't have everything perfect. You get sent back, go get it. It's very hard to do something fraudulent with a vote.
Paper ballots.
Mail-in voting, they give you boxes of stuff. You have no idea where they came from. This mail-in voting, you can't have a great democracy, republic. You can't have it. Well, maybe that's why we're going to end up with a communist mayor in New York. I don't know. He probably is very happy with mail-in voting. But you can't have a great democracy with mail-in voting.
Voter ID, signature verification, chain of custody controls, updated voter rolls, partisan observers watching the voting all day, the vote counting all night. You do paper ballots, you pick a winner, and everyone goes home with confidence in the integrity.
For 10% of the cost.
Yeah.
So if you do paper ballots, it costs you 10% the cost of machines.
Let me ask you this. The Trump doctrine. I have a definition of it. I've said it many times on TV and on radio. I can give you my version of it, or will you give us your version?
I'd rather have your version.
You want my version?
I love
I'll give you my version.
I've heard it before.
My version is,
I've heard it before. I love it. Go ahead.
no forever wars. However, some are interpreting that to mean isolationism. No. You've never been an isolationist. Your first term, you beat the hell out of the ISIS caliphate in record time.
Right.
You took out Soleimani on that tarmac. You beat Baghdadi and associates. You dropped the mother of all bombs on Afghanistan. Your second term, you did something I don't think anybody thought would happen, and that is somebody had the courage. They talked a lot about it for decades, taking out Iran's nuclear program. So you're not an isolationist, but you don't want forever wars either. Right. And every action you've taken militarily is consistent with that philosophy.
And I beat ISIS. We wiped out ISIS.
You beat the ISIS
and
caliphate.
General Kane, who's with us right now, he's right outside, actually. General Kane, we call him Raisin Kane. That's his nickname. That's a good name.
What's my nickname? I don't even want to know.
He's a great guy, but General Kane was the one that did it. Beat ISIS. I was told it was going to take 5 years. He did it in 4 weeks.
Wow. Mr. President, I'm going to let you go, but a big day today, and you're going to fly back.
While military experts and analysts are eagerly awaiting the first results of the meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, Western media have begun to claim that Russia-United States summit in Alaska will be a real disaster for Washington. According to Western media, you will not see the failure of Donald Trump during this summit, as the failure of the current occupant of the White House has already happened. So, a few hours ago, the New York Times reported in its article that Russian President Vladimir Putin skillfully bought valuable time by offering Donald Trump a joint meeting in the United States. American journalists from the New York Times note that even before the start of the historic summit in Alaska, Vladimir Putin managed to make everyone forget about Trump's famous ultimatum. By the way, the New York Times, citing sources inside the White House, reports that President Putin was the one who conceived the idea of holding a summit between the United States and Russia in Alaska. At the same time, reports indicate that Donald Trump seized the opportunity to meet with Putin with such pleasure that he even forgot about his ultimatum and the introduction of new sanctions against Russia. In addition, American journalists from the New York Times also note that while preparations were underway for the Alaska summit, the Russian army achieved significant success in key directions of the front, providing Vladimir Putin with a strong negotiating position. Given all these achievements, American journalists regretfully admit that Russia has already achieved significant success in this great geopolitical game against the West. Against this backdrop, it can be stated with confidence that the Alaska summit will be either a global geopolitical victory for Vladimir Putin or a pragmatically verified move by the Russian president, the positive results of which Moscow will receive shortly. By the way, it is also worth noting that Putin flew to Anchorage along with a significant part of the Russian military and political leadership. It is well known that, along with Vladimir Putin, senior officials from the Russian government and law enforcement agencies arrived at the Elmendorf-Richardson military base in Anchorage. In particular, we are talking about Defense Minister Andrei Belousov, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, Finance Minister Andrei Selyanov, numerous representatives of the Russian General Staff, and several advisors to the Russian president, including Yuri Ushakov. All this shows that Vladimir Putin has great confidence in the Trump administration, and personally in the 47th President of the United States. Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump has officially confirmed that if the talks in Alaska are successful, a second meeting will definitely take place, which will most likely be attended by the head of the Kiev regime, Volodymyr Zelensky. And given the fact that 2 days ago, Russian presidential aide Yuri Ushakov confirmed that the second round of negotiations would take place in Russia, a reasonable question arises. How will this political clown come to Russia after he insulted not only Vladimir Putin but also the whole of Russia and its citizens for 3 years? Obviously, this white powder lover will refuse and demand a meeting on neutral territory. On the other hand, I would advise Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump to order Zelensky to come to Crimea, to finally finish off this puppet of Western globalists, by signing the capitulation of the Kiev regime in Yalta. I am absolutely sure that the so-called European leaders and pro-Ukrainian representatives of the American establishment will not stand this humiliation. Meanwhile, the outgoing chief of the British Defence Staff, Tony Radakin, made another provocative statement. In particular, he urged the West not to be afraid of Russia. According to him, Russia is now breaking the world order, established after the Second World War, and only the entry of the West into a direct war against Moscow can stop Russia. At the same time, Admiral Tony Radakin stressed that Russia is alone, while the Western coalition consists of 32 countries. Tony Radakin noted that hostilities in Ukraine allegedly showed him that it was easy to defeat Russia, and that if all Western countries entered into a direct war, Moscow would capitulate very quickly. Well, my dear truth seekers, this so-called admiral reminds me of a cheap propagandist than a professional officer. Tony Radakin does not seem to understand that Russia is conducting a special military operation in Ukraine against the Kiev regime, and not a war against the Ukrainian people. That is why Russia does not use many types of lethal weapon systems on the battlefield. However, if Western countries, including Britain, attack Russia, this will completely untie Moscow's hands, as a result of which the same Britain may disappear from the map of Europe forever. Meanwhile, while Admiral Tony Radakin is making propaganda statements, trying to show a weak and defenseless Europe as belligerent and formidable, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation has published unique footage of the destruction of the HIMARS missile system and a group of U.S. Army Rangers. This video clearly shows how, in the dead of night, an Iskander-M ballistic missile with surgical precision hits the HIMARS system, along with an escort vehicle carrying 7 U.S. Army Rangers. Given the fact that this HIMARS was destroyed in the Sumy region, these U.S. Army Rangers were ensuring the safety of this missile system, reducing the risk of it falling into the hands of Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups. In addition, sources in the Russian Defense Ministry also confirmed the destruction of the combat crew of this missile system. It is reported that this combat crew consisted of 3 U.S. Army officers. Furthermore, the monitoring and control systems also confirmed the death of 5 Ukrainian soldiers, who were located 80 meters from the site of the missile hit. In total, as a result of this missile attack, the Ukrainian army and NATO forces lost 1 HIMARS system and 15 personnel.
Everything, whether servicemen or logistics, that Ukraine sent to reinforce Pokrovsk was immediately overwhelmed of attacks by Russian drones, which were not closing their eyes 24 hours a day, as in footage released by Russian military correspondents on August 14. Just that evening, the 1st Corps of the Ukrainian National Guard Azov boasted of carrying out the operation, arriving in Dobropol to inflict heavy losses on Russian forces, but instead, they were immediately greeted by a swarm of Russian drones. Azov Brigade is a Ukrainian military unit that has attracted controversy due to its early ties to far-right groups and neo-Nazi symbolism, ironically now part of the National Guard. Spokesman for the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine claimed that Azov Brigade, along with other units, was supposedly to stabilize the situation on Pokrovsk direction. In reality, Russian drone operators were tracking the movements of enemy units and attacking them with FPV drones, even preventing them from landing. The video clearly shows how Azov members stabilize the front line, some never getting down to the dugouts, others not approaching the positions at all. Most of Azov seemed unaware that drones were literally hovering above them, as if they had little prior experience with FPV swarms. Just on August 15, Ukrainian logistics targeting Pokrovsk were questionable at best. Russia began using Gerin drones for remote mining, destroying Ukrainian army control posts on Pokrovsk-Pavlograd strategic and logistics route. In reality, Russian operators were relentlessly tracking Ukrainian logistics movements, destroying the enemy with drones, preventing them from deploying their equipment to prepared defense lines, and preventing them from halting Russian advance. The day before, Russian reconnaissance drones detected an Ukrainian logistics center on the front lines in the direction located in Donetsk. The base was also destroyed by several of the enemy's feared Gerin drones. This is Russian tactical justification for launching Gerin. Once again, Ukraine suffered heavy losses due to the fire caused by Russian notorious drones, altering Kiev's hopes of defending the strategic city of Pokrovsk. Satellite imagery shows the aftermath of a joint strike by the Russian armed forces on Ukrainian defense production facilities involved in the development of the Sapsin tactical ballistic missile system, thwarting Western plans, FSB said on Thursday. Footage released by FSB and the Russian Ministry of Defense on August 14, 2025, shows destruction at a mysterious ballistic missile design bureau, production plant, and assembly plant within the Ukrainian military-industrial complex. The data obtained by FSB allows Russia to determine the destruction of the factories producing the long-range missiles, with a range of between 500 kilometers and 750 kilometers, built with the assistance of a Western European country and reportedly funded by Germany, intended to deliver devastating strikes deep into Russian territory. It should be noted that the images also show damage from the strikes throughout the entire duration of the special military operation. The Ministry of Defense released a compilation of videos throughout July showing massive, grouped strikes with precision weapons against design bureaus, rocket fuel production plants, and missile assembly plants within the Ukrainian military-industrial complex, linked to the Sapsin missile production site. according to intelligence obtained by FSB. As a result of a joint operation between FSB and the Ministry of Defense. The targets are the Pavlorad chemical plant in Dnipropetrovsk region as the Ukraine's only solid fuel production facility. The chemical plant's reserve facility, PHC, in Bakalenchik village of Zhytomyr region where the evacuation order for the plant's production and warehouses was issued. Shostka State Plant Zvezda in Sumy region. And Shostka State Research Institute of Chemical Products. In fact, Sapsan missile is no longer a mystery to Russian FSB since 2024, long before Zelensky's announcement on May 28, 2025 without naming the missile. According to recordings of conversations in 2024, the planned production rate of 200 Sapsan missiles per month was recorded. FSB managed to access surveillance cameras at the production plant, and days before the first Sapsan launches were scheduled toward Russian cities with NATO authorization. Russia destroyed the production sites to prevent threats from Kiev. Germany funding for Sapsan is yet another demonstration of Europe's complicity in this war. They have now lost a key project, and with it, another illusion of a game changer. Former Yuzhmash CEO, Smolenko, said Ukraine's only option is medium and short-range missiles like the Sapsan, with a range of up to 900 kilometers.
То есть ее строительство будет засечено, обнаружено, уничтожено моментально. И в этом уничтожении примет участие непосредственно не только Россия, но и Америка. Никто не позволит стране, не уходящей в ядерный клуб, и тем более непостоянный член Совета Безопасности, обладать технологиями, и не только технологиями, а и производить и ставить на боевое дежурство ракетные комплексы стратегического назначения. Второй вариант, если это не шахта, это космодром. На Украине невозможно построить космодром, потому что как и для шахты, так и для космодрома нет полей падения. То есть для первой ступени и второй, вторая, ладно, в океан может упасть, в данном случае на территорию России, если это удар по России, но первая ступень все равно ложится там, в ближайшем радиусе. И остается только ракеты средней и меньшей дальности, и, соответственно, оперативно-тактические типа Сапсана. Сапсан это один в один. Это грубое приближение, но очень близок к Искандеру по тактико-техническим характеристикам, по габарите, по массе, по полезной нагрузке. Я это взрывчатое вещество называю полезной нагрузкой. 450-480 килограмм, в зависимости кассетная или фугасная часть боевая, и дальность 550 километров. Но характеристики, заложенные в ракету Сапсан, позволяют ей иметь дальность и 700, и 900.
Coffee. Follow me.